Chapter 81, Prophecy. Luke left Larissa's office and started walking down the hallway. As he came around the corner, he saw Wednesday leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Any student would have been startled, but with her domain he already knew she was there. "What's wrong?" asked Luke, looking at Wednesday. It looked like the girl had something to say, and he knew where the conversation would go. "We need to talk," Wednesday said. "Oh, I never thought I'd hear that coming from you," Luke said with a slight smile. It was the first time the girl had ever taken the initiative to make conversation. Well, Luke wasn't taking the initiative either and was talking to try to annoy her. "Well, now you've heard it," Wednesday said without changing her expression. "What do you want to talk about?" "That drawing Rowan showed you?" asked Luke, starting to walk at a slow pace. Wednesday followed him. "Yes, how much have you heard?" "Everything. It's a prophecy that says you'll destroy Nevermore or something." Xavier and Enid heard it too, Luke replied, though he already knew that from his past memories. The only thing different was that he was in the picture. I noticed the weird looks on both of their faces. They kept quiet and didn't give me away to the principal," said Wednesday. "What good would it do them to rat you out? Their only evidence is a drawing of Rowan, who is psychologically messed up, and a prophecy his mother made 25 years ago," said Luke with a scornful expression. "Right, you also appear in the drawing according to Rowan," said Wednesday, taking the drawing out of her uniform and showing it to Luke, who could observe it for the first time. "The boy has a certain resemblance to me." "The girl looks like Wednesday too," thought Luke, examining the drawing. "Do you really believe what Rowan said, that you will destroy Nevermore? And why am I appearing? Will I be an accomplice?" asked Luke, shaking his head, although in reality he already knew a lot about the prophecy. "He's playing dumb." Wednesday was silent in thought. She would not usually believe in such irrational things. She did not believe that her behavior could be altered by a prophecy. However, since arriving at Nevermore, she began to have visions. Her second aura had awakened. The violet aura indicates a predisposition to have visions of the past, present, or future. In one of her first visions since arriving at Nevermore, when she had to go to her appointment with her therapist, she inadvertently collided with a man and saw how the same man was run over by a tractor for crossing the street distractedly. After her boring and tedious session, when she left, she saw ambulances and the dead man, exactly as in her vision. This made her doubt. Rowan's mother might be right. A violet aura psychic who had a future vision where she destroyed Nevermore. The violet aura exists. The prophecy may be true. I did some research, and Rowan's mother was an important prophet, Wednesday replied after a few moments. And no, of all the auras it is the most implausible. Many of those psychics made prophecies that never came true. 25 years is a long way off. The farther away the prophecy is, the harder it is for it to come true, Luke said, wondering if Wednesday would get mad since he is insulting the second aura she possesses. It may be far-fetched, but the possibility of it happening is still there no matter how low. "If so, won't you do anything?" asked Wednesday. She didn't want to be controlled by a prophecy she didn't know about that said it would destroy Nevermore. Okay, give me the drawing," said Luke. Taking the drawing out of Wednesday's hand, he began to look at it. After a few minutes, he held it up to the sunlight for better illumination. Luke noticed a watermark that slowly appeared. All of this made it as natural as possible. He knew there was a watermark on the drawing. With his photographic memory, he had already gone over the events of the series several times so as not to skip anything and see if he could use anything to his advantage. "There's something there," said Luke. "What is it?" "I hadn't noticed," said Wednesday, a little surprised. She looked at the drawing countless times these days. "Invisible ink. Sunlight or fire activates them," Luke replied as he took a closer look at the symbol that had appeared. It seemed strange to Wednesday that Luke had figured something out as soon as he picked up the drawing, but his acting was so natural that she put that little suspicion aside. Besides, it was a sunny day, and to see the drawing better it was normal to illuminate it with sunlight. She usually avoids sunlight and lives in the shadows like a bat. That's how she keeps her skin so pale. "I recognize the symbol. It belongs to the Nightshade Society," Luke said, passing the drawing to Wednesday so she could get a better look at the watermark. "Nightshade Society, what's that?" asked Wednesday. "A Nevermore secret society. Your family didn't tell you about it?" asked Luke with a raised eyebrow. "No, why? It was founded by your ancestor Goody Adams. Your parents were members of the society when they were at Nevermore." "My parents were too," Luke replied. I don't want to follow in my parents' footsteps, so I don't care." Wednesday justified herself. "That's why she always went to normie schools. Anyway, this drawing must have been torn out of a book found in this secret society. We must go there. Do you know how to go?" asked Wednesday. "Yes, we'll go tonight. Pass me your number so I can arrange where to meet you," Luke said. "I don't have a cell phone or any kind of technology," said Wednesday without changing her expression. Forget that she's anti-technology, thought Luke. unable to believe that a girl her age doesn't use a cell phone. They arranged at that moment a time and place to meet in the evening. Then they each went their separate ways. Luke was planning to lead Wednesday in the prophecy. Since Rowan hadn't died, there were some visions the girl wouldn't have, and she might be a little lost. Why was he doing this? To curry favor with her. He could see that Wednesday was powerful. She will be useful if the Spellmans decide to attack Nevermore again. Luke knows that deep down Wednesday does care about people, especially those close to her like her family. Enid in the series was her first friend. The same thing could happen here. If that happens, Luke will have Wednesday to protect Enid, so he will be more at ease. As for his role in the prophecy, it mattered little to him. He knew the key was Wednesday. It was her blood that would allow Crackstone to come back to life and try to destroy Nevermore. That is why Rowan's mother saw Wednesday as the one to blame for the destruction of Nevermore. Not because she is going to destroy Nevermore with her own hands. In fact, her blood is what would revive the madman who wants to murder all outcasts. Crackstone. I wonder how strong he'll be, Luke thought as he walked back to his bedroom. Chapter 82. Infiltration with Wednesday. Luke arrived at his bedroom to find Xavier and Ajax playing console games. Since the Hyde attack, Xavier and Bianca had broken up. Bianca's siren friend Sarah also did not advance her relationship with Ajax, and they stopped seeing each other now that Xavier and Bianca were separated. Luke had stopped seeing Gia and ended his Casanova days. It didn't last long. Breaking up with Gia was harder than he thought. The girl cried and it was awkward, but Luke stood his ground. He liked her, but nothing more than that. He made a promise to Enid that he wouldn't be with girls he barely knew just for sex. Plus he was looking for them to replace Enid. Now Enid told him that she doesn't mind fighting the Spellmans in her parents' opinion. So if she gets strong enough she'll come back to him. What are you guys playing? Asked Luke, opening a minibar and grabbing a cold soda. Call of Duty, replied Xavier, concentrating looking at the screen. Did you get better or are you still as bad as ever? Asked Luke sitting on a couch. Ajax chuckled slyly at the comment. Shut up, now that I don't have to stand next to Bianca like a lapdog all the time, I can improve my gaming skills, Xavier said with a smile. Good for you, said Luke, taking a sip of his soda. You broke up with Gia too, didn't you? Asked Ajax, curious. We were never anything, but you could say yes. It was awkward. I had to have done it on a cell phone, Luke grimaced. He didn't understand how Gia could cry so much. They had only known each other less than 2 months. He almost felt some guilt, but on second thought, he shouldn't feel guilt. He didn't even have sex with her, so he didn't take advantage of his popularity and fame like a classic womanizer would who after having sex with one girl dumps her to move on to the next. Breaking up over a cell phone is cowardly, Xavier said, though he doubted Luke cared about other people's opinions. Anyway, the three of us are single now. We can do what we want and when we want. Let's play all night. Tomorrow is Saturday, Xavier said, thinking about having a video game marathon. I'm in, Ajax said, and Luke nodded. He was due to meet Wednesday late at night, so it would be best to stay awake until that time. The hours passed and the boys played a plethora of video games while eating junk food and drinking soda. Unlike normies, their bodies were better, so they should not give importance to junk food. If a normie needs 3,000 kcal a day to gain weight and be fat, an average outcast would need twice as much. It is rare to see fat outcasts. Eugene is one of them, although his belly is no big deal. Still 30 minutes to go, thought Luke, who was leaning back on the couch. Xavier and Ajax were sleeping soundly. It was 4:30 in the morning. They had been playing for hours. Come to think of it, if Rowan already belonged to the Nightshade Society, they must be part of it too, Luke thought. Looking at his two friends, he wasn't upset that they didn't tell him. It's supposed to be a secret society. You shouldn't tell people no matter how much they are your friends. Since they were both here, it meant they wouldn't have a meeting, so he has a free hand to infiltrate with Wednesday. 10 minutes before the agreed time, Luke came out of the bedroom as stealthy as possible and headed to the place they agreed on with Wednesday. A silhouette that was camouflaged by the shadow was already there. Thanks to his domain, he could sense it, or he would have stopped to wait for it without realizing it was there. Your stealth is amazing, huh? Said Luke truthfully. And no, I'm more amazed at your ability to see me right away, replied Wednesday, looking at Luke with narrowed eyes. Although she hadn't wanted to disappear her presence completely, it was rare for someone to have spotted her right away when it was nighttime. I'm perceptive, come on, gotta get to the main quad, Luke said, starting to walk. In a few minutes they reached the quad, which was a pentagon surrounded by walls and walkways. In the center was a fountain with a large dead tree. On one of the walkways nearby was a statue of Edgar Allan Poe. Is the entrance hidden behind the statue? Asked Wednesday, and Luke nodded. Classic, said Wednesday, not at all astonished. This is one of the entrances. It leads to the Nightshade Society library. It's the only one I know of, said Luke. Aren't you a member? Asked Wednesday with a raised eyebrow. Of course I'm not. The society is no longer of any use at all since it disbanded 30 years ago when a normie was killed. Now it's a harmless club for social events and crap like that, Luke replied with a grimace. He'd never get into this stupid club. I see, Wednesday said. Inwardly she shared Luke's view. She wouldn't join this kind of club either. Without another word, Luke snapped his fingers twice. The bird his great-great-grandfather was holding lowered its wings and shifted its position. The statue began to slowly back away. The mocking smile is the same, Luke thought with a grimace looking at Edgar's statue. When he explained things to him, he always had that mocking smile. Luke and Wednesday began to descend the spiral staircase. On the descent, they noticed a large number of paintings, different members of the Nightshade Society. Finally, they reached the secret library. Luke used his cell phone as a flashlight. Wednesday used a normal flashlight, as she did not own a cell phone. My mother's critical eye. Wednesday muttered, looking at a picture of her parents. How do you know it's critical? Asked Luke. He heard Wednesday's murmur as they were in a completely silent place. I know her, I know, Wednesday said dryly. Do you get along with her badly? Asked Luke. Knowing the answer, I don't want to talk about the relationship I have with my mother with you. I have enough to do with the therapist, said Wednesday, starting to look for the book on the shelves. Luke was surprised by this. He didn't think Wednesday was attending therapy in Jericho. He thought that since she came early to Nevermore she wouldn't be forced to go to therapy. Are you going to therapy? I doubt you're doing it because you want to, commented Luke, who also started looking for the book from which Rowan tore out the page in this case. His photographic memory was of no use to him in finding the book. In the series they didn't show the specific bookshelf. I'm going against my will, by order of the school court. Having been to 7 different schools is not a good curriculum and they think I'm in trouble. Wednesday said with a slight grimace. 7 schools, a great record. I was only expelled from 3. I got saved from the therapist though, Luke said, feeling for some reason respect for Wednesday. Only 3. I thought you'd have a better record, Wednesday said. By better she meant having more expulsions like her. Each expulsion was like a medal and a triumph for her. I would have been expelled from more schools, but I had to restrain myself. I lived in a normie orphanage. I didn't know about the outcast world and that other beings with powers existed. I didn't want to draw attention to myself and have them do experiments on my body, Luke justified himself. Then you should have acted meticulously, so you wouldn't get caught, Wednesday said. You got expelled from 7 schools and you're talking about acting meticulously? Asked Luke. Before Wednesday could respond to his failure, Luke continued speaking. Easier said than done. In the plans I made to get back at the bullies, you have to be very careful if you don't use your powers. There are eyes and cameras everywhere, Luke said. It's true, cameras are a nuisance. I got caught many times because of the recordings. If I had used my powers, I wouldn't have had that problem, said Wednesday, agreeing. They both talked about the best practical jokes they pulled in normie schools. Wednesday's looked like attempted murders. Luke's were practical jokes that at first seemed like attempted murders but lowered in intensity because he didn't know what world he was in. Time passed in the darkened room as they flipped through books and talked about topics that others would consider weird and social misfits even for outcasts. They had more in common than they thought: attempted murder, hating people in school, etc. Why am I talking so much? Thought Wednesday, surprised at herself. Before she could dig any further into that strange feeling, she found the book she was looking for. Here it is, Wednesday said, and Luke walked over to her. They looked at the open book. On the page Rowan tore out, there was another drawing. It was of a man on his back with a hat and a raised cane. Wednesday opened the drawing she got from Rowan and put it in its place. With the drawing at 100, you could see the full perspective. Wednesday and Luke were facing this man who was pointing his staff at them, although Luke was sitting on one of the shattered columns, a pilgrim. Do pilgrims still exist today? Besides, the only one who could give us a fight would be Crackstone. He who made deals with demons, said Wednesday, looking at the drawing. Us, thought Luke, a little surprised to be included with her. Crackstone died hundreds of years ago. Even though he had demonic powers, maybe he's still alive and this one waiting to be revived or something. Luke commented vaguely. Could be. Wednesday nodded. She thought about that possibility as well. As the eldest of Adams's daughters, she knew a little about demons. She wasn't an expert, but she knew it was the most forbidden subject in the outcast society. And she loved taboo subjects. So the next step is to learn more about Crackstone. Or do you have a better idea? Luke asked, yawning. No, that's what I had in mind. We should do more research on Crackstone and his connection to the demons, Wednesday said. Closing the book, it was odd that she agreed with someone else's suggestion, but she also thought that was what they should do. I don't recommend you steal the book. They have a way of tracking you. I already stole 2 books last year and they found me, Luke suggested. Then I'll do this," said Wednesday, ripping out all the pages of the book in one fell swoop. With her ponytail of hair, she pulled them together so they wouldn't get separated and tucked them away in her uniform. She left the cover in the same place. "That can work too," said Luke with a strange expression. It didn't occur to him to steal that way. Rowan did it with a page, and nothing happened to it, so the method worked. Then they went back to the surface. It was already dawn. "We'll talk soon," Wednesday said quickly, disappearing and leaving Luke alone on the spot. At least she said goodbye to reform. That's a breakthrough, thought Luke, yawning and going back to his bedroom. Chapter 83, Plan in the Making. Luke arrived at the dorm and collapsed on his bed. It had been an exhausting day, classes in the morning, training in the afternoon, chatting with Principal Weems, a video game marathon with Xavier and Ajax, and finally infiltrating the Nightshade Society with Wednesday. It was almost 7 in the morning, and he only had about 4 hours to sleep. Today he had a meeting with his editor in Jericho. They would talk about some things about his novels and future projects. 4 hours later, Luke was at the Weather Vane, Jericho's main coffee shop. It is located on the corner of the main street, near Jericho's main square. Luke had dark circles in his eyes and unkempt hair. The morning was cold. It was the middle of November and a temperature of 5 degrees. Not as cold as winter, but you had to bundle up. Across from him was Josh, his publisher, a man who since meeting Luke has been very enthusiastic and talkative as he makes a lot of money from him. "The first 2 weeks of Carrion Theaters were a success," said Josh enthusiastically. "I'll buy whatever you have for breakfast," he added, laughing loudly. How did his personality change so much? Luke thought, looking at the enthusiastic man. He liked him as he was easy to work with. But he was better when he wasn't so enthusiastic and talkative in the mornings. What money didn't give happiness was a complete lie. In front of him, he had proof of that. "Keep your voice down," Luke said, noticing the look on everyone's faces in the cafeteria. The last thing he wanted was to have his picture taken since he was known in Jericho. After he said that, a girl and a guy approached him, asking for a photo and autograph. Luke agreed. Although he didn't smile in the picture, he tried to put on his friendliest possible expression. "You never liked to smile, huh? What would God think that gave you that face?" Josh said, shaking his head. "Shut up, I'm an atheist," Luke said with a grimace. With Josh, he was already confident enough to tell him to shut up so he wouldn't get mad. "How much did you say Carrie raised?" asked Luke, who hadn't heard right. In its first weekend it grossed $35 million. With that first weekend it already covered the budget. Now it's just profit. "They didn't think it would be so well received," replied Josh, smiling. "That's good." Luke thought, "Here's what they ordered." Luke turned his head and noticed a boy with brown hair, green eyes, a kind expression, and a mole on his face. Tyler, the hidden Hyde and Jericho serial killer, Luke thought. "It's him, the boy from the woods," Tyler thought fearfully. What he didn't know was that Luke was reading his thoughts. "He has memories of the battle. It looks like he's not as unconscious as I thought. He's a full-blown psychopath," Luke thought. He didn't know if the sadistic, psychopathic, cold personality was because of his high personality. But he didn't care. Luke remembered that in the series at the police station, Tyler admitted to Wednesday being the Hyde and claimed that he likes to kill. His personality took a 180-degree turn. "That's a real psycho," Luke thought with a frown. He remembered a few times several people called him a psychopath. If he were, he would have murdered them, since he had the power to do so. His 3 auras would allow him to murder people and hide the facts without much difficulty. But why would he spend his energy on murdering someone weak? It's no fun. What's fun is fighting someone strong and challenging. As for the weakling, it's best to ignore him. Tyler, at the sight of Luke's scowl, shivered slightly. He left his breakfast on the table and left quickly. What should I do with him? Luke thought as he started breakfast, and Josh was still talking enthusiastically. He was thinking about whether he should get rid of Tyler. That way Marilyn would be a weak normie, and she wouldn't be able to resurrect Crackstone. Although in this world Wednesday is much more powerful, and if she fights to the death against Hyde, Luke doesn't know who the winner will be. Killing Tyler is not difficult for Luke. He can control his mind, take him to a remote area and kill him from a distance. If he is turned into Hyde with his telekinetic powers, he is confident he can kill him. Just then, he felt a familiar presence within his domain. As he left Nevermore, he extended his domain as far as possible. About 20 chem in total, that was his maximum. In the combat he had in his psychic class, he only used 10 chem. He was on alert for the Spellmans. In the summer they did nothing. It was about time they showed up in Jericho again. And he had not been wrong. He noticed 2 familiar presences, 2 outcasts who participated in the attack on Raven Island last year, the faceless one and the half-breed girl named Amaranth. If they're here, Sabrina must be somewhere, Luke thought, smiling inwardly. It wasn't a kind smile. He wanted to murder Sabrina and all those bastards on her side. Last time she'd escaped by the skin of her teeth. This time it wouldn't be the same. No matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find Sabrina's presence. Noticing the presence of outcasts was easier than normies. Their presence is stronger. In a city full of normies, it is easy to notice them. He noticed that the faceless one and Amaranth seemed to be watching the cafe. Is that why I came? I don't think so. No one knew what I would have a meeting about today with Josh. Are they watching Tyler? Thought Luke, with several options in mind as to why they were watching the coffee shop. Last year, he defeated Sabrina and the others. He even killed one of her teammates. So it shouldn't have been just them coming in. They must have had a different plan in mind to assassinate him. They must think I have no idea they're here, or that if I'm suspicious I don't know anything about their movements. It's time to take the frying pan by the handle, Luke thought, creating a plan in his head. This time he would not wait for his enemies to attack him. He would hunt them down. However, the most important thing before hunting them down was to find out about their plans and gather evidence to present to the outcast police, striking a blow at the entire Spellman family for involving third parties in their grudge. Hey Luke, are you listening to me? You haven't talked in a while, Josh asked. Yeah, you were talking about the mystery of Salem's Lot, Luke said. Yes, its sales are very good, but not on the level of Carrie. However, a lot of reviewers think your writing is much improved over Carrie. It's a much longer and more complex novel. The reviews are great, Josh said. Yes, it will be harder to adapt it to film. Maybe a series would be good, Luke commented without paying much attention to this conversation. Exactly, Josh continued to babble, as Luke thought of a plan to catch their enemies. It would be best to capture one of them. He had already picked a target, the faceless one. His strength was no big deal. He would be the easiest target to defeat, although he was also confident of defeating Amaranth. Luke's strength grew by leaps and bounds. It was as if he was someone else compared to his level on Raven Island last year. Finished with his breakfast, he chatted some more with Josh and returned to Nevermore. He was sleepy and had a plan in mind that he needed to think through with better mental clarity so he didn't screw it up. Chapter 84, Polygamy. Luke returned to Nevermore. He went straight to his room and found Xavier and Ajax watching TV while eating pizza and drinking soda of questionable quality. Sleeping with the TV on and these two guys talking would be difficult, so he put off his sleep. Will you guys keep eating junk and wasting time? Asked Luke as he opened his closet and searched for sportswear. Since he couldn't sleep, he would train and also talk to his great-great-grandfather in a quieter environment. Don't be a spoilsport. It's the weekend. And the day is awful. We train enough Monday through Friday, Xavier said, taking a bite of his slice of pizza. You're going to practice? Asked Ajax in disbelief that Luke was putting on his sports outfit. Yes, Luke replied. Even though he got little sleep, his outcast physique is better than normies. He could sleep less and be in perfect condition. He just liked to sleep like everyone else. How many days have you been staying here? Asked Luke, looking at Ajax. He noticed a mattress lying on the floor with sheets and pillows. He got to thinking, and for several days now Ajax has been staying in his and Xavier's room. You're finally figuring it out. I thought you'd never ask, Ajax said. It took him 4 days to ask. I wouldn't give me my $100, Xavier said with a smile. Ajax resignedly pulled out a $100 bill from his wallet and handed it to Xavier. Did they bet? Thought Luke it wasn't a big deal to him that Ajax was staying in his room. Since he wasn't bringing girls anymore, he didn't care. This year I have to share a dorm with my brother. I can't stand him, that's why I came here, explained Ajax, sighing. You have a brother? Asked Luke in surprise. I told you, Xavier said, holding out his hand, and Ajax went back to give him another $100. Luke looked at the exchange without saying anything. You should listen when someone talks to you, Ajax said, though he didn't sound annoyed at all. He knew Luke and considered him his friend. He knew he sometimes went into automatic mode and was in his world thinking who knows what things. Sorry, Luke said, scratching his cheek. It doesn't matter, I have a younger brother. He's entering this year at Nevermore. He's my half-brother, said Ajax. Half-brother? Asked Luke curiously. This meant two things. Either their parents split up and one of them had another child, or they cheated, and Ajax's half-brother was born. Yes, he's my stepmother's son, Ajax replied. I understand. I didn't know you could share a bedroom with someone from a different year, Luke said, putting the necklace around his neck. If the family asks, it's granted. But usually they put you with someone from your year, Ajax said. I don't think you understand, said Xavier, pausing the movie and looking at Luke, who looked at him blankly. What do you mean I don't understand? Asked Luke. You think Ajax's parents split up and his father married another woman, and they had his half-brother, right? Said Xavier. Yes. What else could it be? said Luke, who still didn't understand. I forgot you came from a normie orphanage, commented Ajax. What you think is not so. Ajax's father has 3 wives. He didn't split up. He's married to all 3. Xavier explained. Exactly. I have an older brother who already finished Nevermore and is working on the council. Ajax said normally. Luke's expression had changed. He hadn't expected this revelation. 3 wives, polygamy is accepted in outcasts, asked Luke, and they both nodded. Polyandry is also accepted, Ajax added. This was when a woman had multiple husbands. The marginalized did not discriminate between women and men. As long as the offspring can be greater, it doesn't matter if a woman has several husbands or a man has several wives. I don't know why I am surprised. According to Edgar, marriage between relatives is also accepted in marginalized people because it has no genetic consequences as in normies. It even makes it possible to maintain the lineage. In the case of a psychic family, let their children have the aura they want and dominate. Luke thought with a hand on his chin. Thinking about it further, polygamy made sense. The outcasts had a very poor population compared to the normies. If you could have more offspring, all the better. They should mention this in marginal history, Luke muttered, as he walked out of the dorm room in the direction of the gym. I told you interfamily marriage is accepted. It wouldn't be uncommon for polygamy to be practiced. Edgar said, coming out of the collar. Were you listening? Said Luke with a grimace. He could predict what talk Edgar wanted to have from beginning to end. You are the last member of the Poe family. You must increase the number of family members. Polygamy will be of great help to you, Edgar said with a smile and stroking his mustache. Here we go, thought Luke, sighing internally. Plus you're a 3 aura user. Your offspring are very likely to possess 2 auras. The more better. If you find a 2 aura psychic, imagine your offspring. They'll be 2 auras for sure. That's why that Veronica girl was a good choice. But you pushed her away, Edgar said, shaking his head in closing. I can barely put up with 1 girl. And you want me to put up with 2 or 3? Asked Luke. He wouldn't have the energy. With Enid he had enough in that he was in love. If he had to spend his time satisfying 2 or 3 women, he would go crazy. Having another wife he didn't trust and couldn't stand would be a martyrdom he wanted to spare himself. Oh, you're one of the idealists. I was one of those too, Edgar said proudly of his offspring. The ideal in these cases would be to marry for convenience, not thinking about loving all your wives. Luke didn't think that way exactly. You only had 1 wife. After she died, you almost died of depression until you fell in love with your partner, said Luke. It's true, I only had 1 wife, and with Elmira I didn't get to marry since I died. However, your situation is different. You're the only member of the Poe family. Having more than 1 wife will be key to reviving the family, Edgar explained. I won't force you to marry someone you don't love. You have your whole life ahead of you. Just keep that in mind, he added. Luke nodded reluctantly. He'd rather not talk about it. He arrived at the secondary gym, and it was empty as usual. What do you want to train today? Asked Edgar. Before that I want to talk about something, said Luke, making Edgar curious. Oh, what is it? Asked Edgar, noticing Luke's seriousness. Luke began to tell him about discovering the hooded men who attacked last year. They were back in Jericho. Since he knew their presence, he could recognize them, which meant Sabrina Spellman was in Jericho. He also told her about the prophecy Rowan told them about, which Wednesday would destroy Jericho, and Luke would help her or whatever his presence in the drawing means. He showed him the drawings on his cell phone, the one that featured Wednesday, him, and a pilgrim. A 25-year-old prophecy. The pilgrim must have to do with Crackstone, that's for sure, muttered Edgar with a thoughtful face. Edgar was far more experienced than Luke, Wednesday, and Rowan. He knew about the prophecies, even if they weren't 100% certain. Something would happen, it could not be ignored. How strong was Crackstone? He was a normie, but from what I know, he killed a lot of outcasts, Luke asked curiously. Edgar worked hunting demons, and anyone who deals with them, he should know information about Crackstone. Despite being a normie, his strength could not be underestimated. With dark rituals and a deal with a demon, he came to have the strength to be reckoned with. The yellow aura psychic would have to be at the top of level 4 to fight him, Edgar replied in a serious tone. Goody Adams almost died and devoted much of her life to getting her revenge and killing Crackstone, he added. The top of level 4. Luke thought with a grimace. Even though he was already at level 4, he was nowhere near the top. With my maximum strength, I could defeat it with no problem. Besides, I possess 2 auras which would make the job easier. In your case, by possessing 3 auras you could take him on at your current level, although you lack a bit of battle experience, said Edgar, seeing Luke's expression. Really? Asked Luke with a slight smile. Yes, don't underestimate the 3 auras. Your powers and arsenal are superior to most for having 3 auras. Many make deals with demons to possess 2 auras, and you have 3 naturally, Edgar replied. Then if he's revived, I could take him on, Luke thought, more relieved. Knowing this, he could play with the prophecy and use it to his advantage without worrying too much. As for the Spellmans, you've done well to find out about them. They must think you're still in the dark. This is the perfect time to hunt them down. What do you have in mind? Asked Edgar, who was thinking the same thing as Luke. To hunt down their enemies who thought they were the hunters. Chapter 85. Mind Power. On Sunday, Luke again left Nevermore and again headed to Jericho. This time he used one of the 4 days he could use to leave Nevermore. He was dressed in all black hooded sweatshirt, dark pants, and sneakers. He also wore black sunglasses. His outing today was incognito. Only Larissa knew that. He arrived in Jericho and pulled into a dark, smelly alley about 2 kilometers from the weather vane, the coffee shop where Tyler worked. 2 kilometers was a long distance, about 2,000 meters away, about 20 streets or so. With his domain, he could observe the place perfectly in the presence of the people. There they are, in the same place as yesterday. They must be watching Tyler, Luke thought. On the street in front of the weather vane were 2 presences he recognized that did not belong to normies, the faceless one and the half-breed who had attacked him on Raven Island. Why were they watching Tyler? Did they know about his Hyde status? If they knew, why were they watching him? Did they want to use him to assassinate him, or was there something else? Luke would resolve these doubts today. He did not bring Edgar. The old man said it was his first mission, and he had to do it without help. Hours passed. Both outcasts were still standing in their place, watching the place. Luke was sitting on a dumpster watching them. He didn't think a spy mission would be so boring. When Tyler's shift was over and he left the cafeteria, they started to move and Luke kept an eye on them. He didn't need to move from the spot. The distance he covered with his domain was enough. Why is he working so hard on a Sunday? Luke thought grumpily, starting to walk around in case he needed to act or something. Tyler entered a house most likely his own, and the 2 outcasts following him settled back in one place to keep an eye on him. Will they be watching him all day? Thought Luke, sighing. Just then, Amaranth, the half-breed, left the place. She started to walk away at a great speed. Only the faceless one was left watching Tyler's house. It's time, Luke thought, starting to run towards where the faceless one was. He was getting closer and closer. 2 kilometers was an easy 2 kilometers for Luke. In 2 or 3 minutes, he could be there. He was approaching from behind the faceless one's back. He has no idea of my presence. This will make things easier, Luke thought with a slight smile. Luke arrived at a 2-story commercial building and looked up. There stood the faceless man who was still watching Tyler. He had no idea that his partner's killer was within spitting distance of him. What are you looking at, kid? Asked a middle-aged man watching Luke, who was looking up. His looks were suspicious. Keep walking quietly. You never saw me here, ordered Luke, making eye contact with the middle-aged man who obeyed the letter. With no normies and security cameras in sight, Luke's feet lifted off the ground until he reached the roof of the building. As he stepped onto the ground, the faceless man turned urgently and looked at Luke. Who are you? Asked the faceless one in a surprised tone. In front of him was a man dressed in black with a hood and sunglasses. His face was barely visible. A normie couldn't come out of nowhere on the terrace of a 2-story building. Don't you recognize me anymore? Asked Luke with a faint smile. The faceless one, just like him, was wearing black clothes, but instead of a hood, a cap and sunglasses bigger than his. That voice, said the faceless one in amazement. Kneel, Luke said, and the faceless one's knees wavered until he dropped to the ground and knelt. What the hell? My legs won't listen to me, the faceless one thought in confusion. No matter how hard he wanted to stand up, he could not. When he heard footsteps, he looked up and saw Luke, who had taken off his sunglasses and was watching him with his blue eyes that gave off an icy aura. Mind control. Do you have 2 auras? The faceless one asked with fear in his tone. At first, he felt a lot of hatred when he recognized Luke's voice, since the werewolf Luke killed was his best friend. However, when he saw the aura Luke gave off, he felt fear. Wasn't he supposed to have lived in a normie orphanage? How was he so powerful? Besides, he was a 2-aura user. That changed things a lot. On mind control, you're right, but I don't have 2 auras, Luke replied, watching the faceless one from above. What do you mean? Asked the faceless one. He needed to buy time to undo the mind control. How do you think I identified you? Less than 5 minutes ago you were with a girl named Amaranth. You watched Tyler the half-Hyde for hours, Luke said calmly. What'll, how do you know all that? Asked the faceless one in shock. Both he and Amaranth were acting low-key. How the hell did he know her every move? Think what aura allows you to observe distant places and people? Asked Luke. C'est clairvoyance, replied the faceless one, stuttering and slowly unable to believe his ears. He felt cold sweat run down his featureless face. He knew Sabrina and all the importance the Spellman family placed on her for having 2 auras. What would it be like if there was a 3-aura user? He didn't even know it was possible to have 3 auras. Right, Luke said, smiling as he saw the faceless man's expression. Even though he had no features, he could sense the fear in his tone, and that was enough for him. It felt good to tell a third party that he possessed 3 auras, his fear and despair at facing such power. "What are you doing?" the faceless one asked in fear as he saw Luke move his hand closer to his face. "Don't scream," said Luke, touching the faceless one's forehead with his index finger. The faceless man felt a sharp pang as if a bolt of electricity shot through his mind. Suddenly an unbearable pain exploded in his brain, as if thousands of burning needles pierced every corner of his consciousness. He wanted to scream, but Luke's no-scream command was activated, so he couldn't. The pain intensified, rippling through his mind. The pain intensified, rippling through every nerve. The faceless man's muscles tensed, and his body trembled uncontrollably. With a last choke shriek, his body slumped heavily to the cold floor. "First time I've used it on an outcast, and it worked great. It did some good to try it on drug addicts and normie bums," Luke thought with no change in his expression as he looked at the unconscious faceless man. Without wasting any more time, Luke began to read the faceless man's memory. His blue aura ability had improved greatly since the time he used it on Sabrina. If the person was unconscious to be examined, he could read memories from months ago. Doing so with simple eye contact was an advanced skill he had not yet mastered. 10 minutes later, Luke had gotten all the information he needed. He stood still in place, thinking, "I've got the full picture now. Now I can make a much better plan," Luke thought with a smile. With a new idea in mind, he began to erase the faceless man's memories. "His name is Deacon," Luke knew by reading his mind. Luke erased his memory of their conversation and their little fight. He wouldn't let the faceless one tell his companions that he possessed 3 auras. He only did it to revel in his expression of fear. After that, he created new memories in place of the deleted ones. Nothing happened during that time. He was still watching Tyler's house. Luke was able to erase and create memories at a great speed compared to the first time he did it with Sabrina. He also practiced on drug addicts and homeless normies. Also, when Deacon regains consciousness, he won't realize he was unconscious and just woke up. To him, he was always awake, which won't create any problems. That's all. "Oh, I can try that technique. In the future, he can test if it works," Luke thought, placing an inhibitor in Deacon's mind. The process was more complicated as it was the first time he had placed this kind of thing in a person's brain. One failure and the person would be retarded or something similar. According to the theory in the book, it should already be in place, thought Luke, shaking his hands and giving the job a clean bill of health. The inhibitor served to disable the powers of the outcasts. If Luke activated it, the faceless one would not be able to use his strange powers to counteract his telekinesis. "Though I doubt his power could stop my current telekinesis," Luke muttered, shaking his head. He was just doing it to experiment, with nothing else to do. Luke left the place. 5 minutes later, Deacon woke up and continued to watch Tyler's house as if nothing had happened. "Damn, how long do I have to watch this Hyde?" he thought, stretching his arms out. Luke watched him with his domain for 10 minutes, making sure nothing had gone wrong. After that, he went back to Nevermore. His blue aura was key to being able to put his plan into action. It was very useful to act without attracting attention since he could erase memories, put new ones, and see the memories of his enemies. In addition, he defeated the faceless one with his blue aura alone. Before, it would have been impossible to keep an outcast on his knees, but now he could do it and keep him for several minutes without being able to stand up. It was more effective than his telekinetic pressure. He also had a new technique called pain induction. Just by touching his enemy's forehead, he could induce very high mental pain, to the point that you could end up unconscious. Chapter 86 Spy. Luke, while reading the memories of the faceless man named Deacon, discovered several things. First, besides the faceless one and Amaranth, 3 more people had come on the mission to assassinate him. One of them, as he thought, was Sabrina Spellman. The faceless one doesn't know her real name either, unfortunately. Another was Sabrina's older brother. His name is Sebastian. Maybe he is also fake. Luke doesn't know. Lastly, a tall man named Atlas. Deacon has no idea of this outcast's relationship to Sabrina and her older brother, but he is the one who leads, so he must be an elder in the Spellman family. Luke learns that Deacon Amaranth and Sid the werewolf he killed on Raven Island were servants of Sabrina. Rather, servants of the Spellmans. It's not uncommon for other types of outcasts to be loyal followers of psychics. After all, psychics are in the minority in the outcast society, and the strongest. It is rare to see one psychic under the orders of another. That's what Edgar told him. Principal Larissa, when she first met Luke and learned he was an orphan psychic, knew something was wrong. They could be half-breds of normies and psychics, although cases are sporadic. Atlas, Sabrina, and the other three meet with Marilyn in the cave where she hides Tyler. They gave her a liquid that Atlas claimed would enhance Hyde's strength. In exchange for that enhancer, Marilyn was to take it upon herself to assassinate Luke. If Marilyn doesn't assassinate Luke and decides to revive Crackstone by going for the safer ritual, Crackstone will be sure to assassinate him, or that was Atlas' plan. This way, the Spellmans would have no connection to Luke's murder. The problem was not the murder itself. The problem involved Nevermore and hundreds of students and their grudge, since they didn't want to wait until Luke finished Nevermore. They were looking for less conventional ways. He also didn't know the reason why they tried to assassinate him so badly when his father was left alone during the days he lived at Nevermore. As for how the Spellmans knew about the prophecy of Crackstone's return, it was not far-fetched for them to know. They are an old and powerful family of psychics. Their family members must work in the demon extermination department, having information on demonic cases like Crackstone's. Interesting, Atlas is still alive. Well, no wonder he's still alive, Edgar said with a hand on his chin. Luke was telling him all the information he collected from the faceless man's head. Do you know him? Is he a psychic? Asked Luke. He must have known the power of this outcast, as he seemed to be the leader and the strongest of the five. Luke had already defeated Sabrina, and Amaranth and Deacon were not worried about their strength. He's not a psychic, he's a Gorgon. He followed Sabrina's father from his youth. Many times he stood up to your father. He's a loyal follower of the Spellmans. Edgar replied. A Gorgon. Is he strong? Asked Luke. A little weaker than Crackstone. His advantage is his age. He's 100 years old, maybe a little older, so he has a lot of experience, Edgar replied. Doing a mental count, 100 years that old? Why would he follow Sabrina's father? Sabrina's father should have been a teenager when he met him. Besides that, they were still two different species of outcasts, Luke said with confusion. Sabrina's father is a descendant of Edward and is the same age as your father. Maybe a few years older. Atlas is very old but decides to follow him only because he belongs to the Spellman family. The Gorgons live 500 years or so. Their population is much larger than that of psychics, so there are Gorgon deserters and outcasts from their own families. The psychic families are in the minority, but each one concentrates far greater power and wealth than the other outcast families. That is the reason why many outcasts, such as Gorgons, werewolves, etc., decide to become minions of the more powerful psychic families. Edgar explained patiently. That's it, all for power and wealth? Well, it makes sense, Luke said. Another reason may be that the more radical psychics created books on witchcraft. The advantage of witchcraft is that it doesn't discriminate between outcasts. You can be a werewolf and learn or use the necessary rituals to strengthen yourself. This is what many seek by joining psychic families, Edgar said disapprovingly. Now I remember Goody Adams had the Book of Shadows. Luke thought. Do we have that? Asked Luke. The Posts were an old family and were wealthy at one time. Although they weren't radical, they might have had the occasional book of witchcraft. It would be curious to study dark magic and witchcraft. He had no idea what powers he might gain. We had the odd book. But because of the war against the Spellmans, they were lost. We didn't use them anyway. Only extremist outcasts will make practical use of such books. Dark rituals are dangerous. That's why the hag exists. One wrong step, and you will be insane for the rest of your life. It's still a much lower level than dealing with demons, though, Edgar replied. I understand, Luke said with a thoughtful look. According to Morticia, Goody Adams went too far in her quest for revenge, which meant she couldn't save herself. Maybe she went too far with the rituals and dark magic. What will you do if the Spellmans think Crackstone can be revived? It must be true. They have more information since they have people on the council. If he is revived, Nevermore will be in danger, Edgar asked. He was fond of Nevermore. He didn't want him to be destroyed. I'll let them revive him, Luke replied. He already had a plan in mind with all the information he got. Oh, why? Asked Edgar, curious. I'll get proof that they helped Marilyn in reviving Crackstone. If one of the deadliest enemies of the outcasts revives and scourges Nevermore, it will be big news. What if it came out that the Spellmans helped bring Crackstone back to life, all to kill me and fulfill their old grudge? Luke said with a faint smile. That's a good idea, but you're playing with fire. For that plan you need Crackstone to be revived. Once you have the evidence, you must survive Crackstone, and if you defeat him, Atlas will most likely try to assassinate you, Edgar said in a serious tone. If Luke wants to rat out the Spellmans, it would be best if Crackstone is revived and causes chaos. It wouldn't be the same if they tried, but in the end nothing happened. If Luke succeeds in ratting them out, it will put them in a very difficult situation depending on the damage Crackstone causes in Nevermore and to the children of many outcast families. I know, no risk, no gain, Luke said. From one of the drawers of his bedside table, he pulled out a card given to him by a member of the Fringe Police when he questioned him about the Raven Island attack. The outcast cop had told him he would call if he needed help or had proof of the story he told him about the real culprits in the Raven Island attack. That will be in the end though, Luke thought. If he contacted him as of now, the outcast cop would try to stop the ritual to revive Crackstone. And if that happens, he won't get the big guilt effect he wants to give the Spellmans for reviving a normie and deadly enemy of the outcasts. How do I start collecting evidence? I can start with Deacon, Luke thought. He could think of bugging Deacon to record what he talks about with Atlas and the others. Then he would retrieve them. For this he would use his mind control. This way Deacon won't think it's strange to have a microphone. He'll think he's always had it there and it's nothing to worry about. I could also get close to his lair and take pictures, but I have to get close, and my stealth is no good, Luke thought. Reading Deacon's memories to him, he discovered that the lair they were using was the original Pilgrims' Meeting House. Built in 1625, a house used by Crackstone and other normies to chain and burn outcasts. It was currently in extreme disrepair and was located on the outskirts of Jericho, a more secluded area over 20 kilometers away. If he wanted to take pictures of the place, he needed to approach at a distance not as safe as his domain. He does not specialize in stealth, so he could be discovered and his enemies would realize that he knows about them. This will be a big disadvantage and put them on alert. I know, I can use Wednesday. Ask her for help. We're researching Crackstone. It would make sense to tell her about visiting that place, Luke thought. All he needed to do was to buy an expensive high-quality camera so that the photos would be as clear as possible, without wasting any more time. He opened his MacBook, went to Amazon and bought several things that would be useful to collect clues. A 5.0S professional camera. He bought a pen that had a built-in voice recorder. He didn't know such a useful item existed. He could give it to Deacon and have him record all conversations when he meets with his colleagues. He bought some extras in case he needed more. He also buys a miniature camera to place in strategic places to record undetected. I feel like quite the spy, Luke thought. This purchase would be expensive for a normal person, but he is a millionaire. He had to wait a day for the stuff to arrive. Nevermore allowed students to buy things. There was a post office at the school like the dairy store in Harry Potter, but without so much birdshit and none of the magic. What he needed to do now was talk to Wednesday so she could help him spy on Atlas and the others without being seen. Luke didn't think he would ultimately help revive Crackstone. Rather, he would not intervene and let things happen as they should. At first, he had planned to murder Hyde and Marilyn so that Crackstone would not come back to life and end the prophecy once and for all. However, now he changed his mind. He could use Crackstone's return to his advantage since his mortal enemies were backing him. Then the Outcast Society would not like it at all if a family of important psychics helped revive an insane normie who hates outcasts and made deals with demons. Chapter 87, Date with Wednesday. The last week of November had begun. It was already starting to get much colder and the skies were always cloudy. Luke already had everything he needed to set in motion the plan to collect evidence that the Spellmans wanted to help in the resuscitation of Crackstone. However, he can't leave Nevermore on school days, so he has to wait for the weekend. At breakfast on Monday morning, Luke sat at the table where Wednesday was eating breakfast with a listless expression. The Adams girl was sitting in solitary as usual and at a far table where there was less lighting. "What do you want?" asked Wednesday, looking up from her toast. "To talk about Crackstone. Didn't we agree to talk the next day?" "It's been 2 days," Luke replied. He didn't have time to talk to Wednesday as he left Nevermore and found out about Atlas, Sabrina, and everything they were planning. As expected, Wednesday didn't seek him out and most likely did her research. "Oh, that, I've done some research and I have a question," said Wednesday, staring at Luke with her dark as the abyss eyes. "What is it?" asked Luke, feeling a little uncomfortable about Wednesday's stare. It was rare for him to feel uncomfortable about anything. Crackstone in 1625 was one of the first pilgrims to colonize Jericho. He has a respectable reputation. He is respected by normies and the outcasts who know of his demonic personality are few. "How do you know he made deals with demons? You mentioned it when we looked for the book the other night," Wednesday said. She learned that Luke came from a normie orphanage. How did he know about demons? That was a taboo subject in the Outcast Society. Only the elite outcast families had information about demons. Luke came from a major outcast family, but that was in the past. Now it was almost extinct and he was the last member. "I lived in an orphanage, but I'm the heir to the Poe family. I have my inheritance. My housekeeper is still alive and told me important information." Luke replied. He was lying about the part about Natasha telling him about demons. The ghost of Edgar Allan Poe told him about demons. Mem nodded Wednesday without changing her expression. Did you find out anything else? Asked Luke. Not much, just that he's a hero to the people of Jericho. And in reality he's a fraud, genocidal and xenophobic, replied Wednesday. You should ask your family. They should know everything, thought Luke. Like the grudge between the Poes and the Spellmans, the Adamses had a grudge with Crackstone. If the Spellmans knew that Crackstone was still alive, sealed in a coffin with blood, the Adams should be aware of that. But Wednesday was a very stubborn girl. She didn't want to seek help from anyone, not even her family. She was not on good terms with her parents, especially her mother Morticia. The last thing she would do would be to ask her for help and for her to tell her the story of her family. Did you get any information, or did you just waste your time these days? Asked Wednesday. What a nice way to ask, thought Luke a little bit. Crackstone's history is full of lies. If you look it up on the internet or in books, he comes across as a kind and hardworking person, when in reality, he was a genocidal and xenophobic colonizer towards the outcast native inhabitants of Jericho. If we want to know details of his past, it's best to visit historical sites to see if we can find anything, Luke replied. That might do some good. What places? Asked Wednesday, who had not researched Jericho's historical sites very thoroughly. Pilgrim World. It's a modern recreation of the Pilgrim settlement, but they supposedly collected artifacts related to Crackstone. There may be something useful. Luke replied. His information was useful, thought Wednesday, surprised that she found someone else's information useful. Her approach was not to visit historical sites. It was to get information on Crackstone's true personality through books from the Nightshade Society or the Nevermore Library. But she didn't find much despite all the books she read. Fine, we will visit Pilgrim World. We have to wait for the weekend so we can get out of Nevermore. Do you still have the days off, Ward? Asked Wednesday. Yes, you. Asked Luke, and Wednesday nodded. Saturday? Asked Wednesday. Yes, 10 of them. At that time Pilgrim World opens. Asked Luke. Yes, it's all agreed, said Wednesday, getting up from her seat with her tray. She left the tray where it belonged and walked out of the cafeteria. Luke decided that after that, he would visit the faceless deacon again. He would plant the pen with the hidden voice recorder and camera on him. As for visiting the real dilapidated Pilgrim house to get pictures, he would do that another day along with Wednesday in the next few days. Luke would already let Larissa and his dorm manager know that he would use a day off to visit Pilgrim World. On Saturday, Wednesday woke up early as usual, at 7 o'clock in the morning. She always has the same routine no matter if it's a weekday or a weekend. Her roommate, Enid, was still sleeping peacefully while she started to get ready and have breakfast. Then she began her daily routine at her typewriter, where she continued with her novel. As she was quietly typing, a hand came up to her desk. It was just that, a hand that moved and had great agility. The hand looked like it belonged to a corpse and had seams like it had been stabbed or something. The hand's name was Thing, a servant of the Adams who performs various useful functions for the family. Gomez had sent him on a mission to keep an eye on Wednesday, but he was discovered by the girl, so he ended up pledging loyalty to her. It was either that or be locked in a box for the rest of the year. Wednesday paid no attention to Thing and continued writing undisturbed by his presence. The hand began tapping on the table. It was Morse code. He was using it to communicate with Wednesday. Yes, today I will visit Pilgrim World, in search of clues about the supposed prophecy, Wednesday said without stopping typing. Thing tapped the table again. It won't be convenient for you to come, said Wednesday, and Thing tapped the table harder than before. That's not why I'm saying it. With Luke's telekinetic powers and my dark powers, we'll be able to deal with any situation in the Pilgrim World. Infiltrating and stealing some stuff will be easy, Wednesday said. Thing tapped the table several times, and this time Wednesday stared at him, stopping writing. A date? You think I'd go on a date? Asked Wednesday in an icy tone. If you say that again, you'll have a new scar on your little body, she added. And Thing left the table quickly and climbed up to Enid's bed. Is it time to train already? Murmured Enid slowly as she opened her eyes. She got out of bed with a sleepy expression and tousled hair. What's wrong, Thing? Asked Enid, noticing the hand trembling near her. Thing began to give Enid several signals that she could understand. Wednesday, threatening poor Thing again? Asked Enid in an accusing tone, looking at Wednesday, who rolled her eyes for a second. You already fought and you managed to apologize. I don't think you want to go through that again, said Enid, getting up from the bed completely and putting Thing on her shoulder. Believe me, I don't want to go through that again, Wednesday said, standing up. She put on her black jacket and started heading for the door. Thing began to make a lot of signs to Enid, who after a few seconds understood the whole situation and put on a surprised expression. You're going on a date with Luke? exclaimed Enid, stopping Wednesday. She stepped in front of the door so she couldn't get out. Wednesday looked at Enid without changing her expression. She was getting used to how annoying her roommate was. Luckily, since Hyde's first attack, Enid trained a lot and was always exhausted, so she wasn't as enthusiastic as she was in the beginning. "It's not a date," Wednesday said definitively, and her gaze settled on Thing, who went back to hiding behind Enid. "To me, that sounds like a date," Enid said, crossing her arms and not moving from her spot. "It isn't. Besides, why do you care? He's your ex-boyfriend," Wednesday said with a hint of curiosity about these irrational behaviors of people. "If you broke up, you should stop thinking about your ex-partner, and it shouldn't affect you what he does with his life. It's complicated." "I'm his ex-girlfriend for now," said Enid with a confused expression. In these days, Enid realized that Luke stopped being a womanizer, although in reality he had only been with 3 or 4 girls, so she was very happy and thought he was waiting for her. "For now," thought Wednesday with a raised eyebrow. "You must remember about the prophecy Rowan talked about. Luke and I are involved because of what we're investigating. One of the places where there may be information is Pilgrim World," Wednesday said. If she didn't explain this, she would have to fight her way out of her room, and she didn't want to waste energy. "Oh, that's it. Makes sense," Enid said with a relieved smile. Letting the exit clear, Thing seeing this began to make several signs in protest. He didn't want to be left out in uncovering the mystery. "At least take Thing with you. He can be of help." "You don't want to apologize to him again, do you?" said Enid, putting Thing in her hands and extending them toward Wednesday. "Fine," said Wednesday, taking Thing. She didn't want the hand to be offended and have to apologize again. She's not good at that and hates having to apologize. "Good luck with your investigation," Enid said, signing off with a smile. Internally, she thought about questioning Thing. Once he returned, she had to make sure it wasn't a date. Wednesday and Luke met at the entrance to Nevermore. Without much conversation, they hailed a cab to Pilgrim World. Chapter 88, Strange Behavior. The drive went by in silence. Luke thought about how many mutilated people Marilyn needed for the ritual. In addition to getting the blood of Wednesday, a descendant of Goody Adams, she needed mutilated body parts. The murders weren't just for the sake of it. So far, 2 people have been killed by the Hyde, an elderly man and a normie high school girl from Jericho. Their bodies had been found mutilated. The old man was missing his right leg, and the girl was missing her left leg. Following this pattern, Marilyn needs about 5 mutilated parts of her victims for the ritual, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, before attacking Wednesday. She must get those parts for the ritual. She must murder 3 people at least. Maybe she also needs a person's torso or organs. I don't know, thought Luke, looking out the window. If he were to go by the series, Hyde killed a total of 6 people, but he wouldn't trust this information 100. He didn't manage to kill Rowan, so she was late, thought Luke. Since the attack that day, Hyde stopped murdering normies and stopped his killing spree. "Luke, before Marilyn has all the parts needed for the ritual and points to Wednesday, he must get enough evidence. So if Hyde takes longer to murder people, all the better for him. The Spellmans look like they won't act and are just watching." "What are you thinking?" asked Wednesday, looking sideways at Luke, who turned his head and looked at her with an expression of mild surprise. "What?" asked Wednesday, making eye contact with Luke. "Weirdly, you ask something, and it doesn't have to do with catastrophic prophecies or serial killers," said Luke. "What's weird is that you say it like you know me," said Wednesday. She was surprised by her question, but she hid it perfectly. She doesn't know why she asked that question. It seemed like the typical question to set up an irrelevant topic of conversation. Thing, who was on Wednesday's shoulder hidden by the dark jacket, started tapping her on the shoulder to ask her what the hell that was. He too was surprised by his mistress' question. "Shut up or I'll kill you," Wednesday muttered toward her shoulder. "It's not that. I mean, whenever you talk, it's always to say important things." "Never mind," Luke said, shaking his head. "It was better not to start a stupid argument that would go nowhere." "I was thinking about the serial killer that's in Jericho," he said, answering the initial question. Wednesday put aside her anger at her own odd behavior and Thing's tapping. She knew Luke was referring to Hyde, who murdered 2 people, but since they had a normie in front of them, they had to be discreet. In addition to killing them, he mutilated them. He ripped off a different leg from each of them. "A fetish, or?" said Wednesday with a thoughtful attitude. "Exactly. I don't think he's doing it for a fetish. I'm not 100, but he didn't seem to have that behavior," Luke said, the last sentences in a lower tone so only Wednesday heard. Wednesday nodded in agreement with Luke. She fought the Hyde, and he seemed to be the kind of irrational monster that rendered his victim unrecognizable, not the kind that would tear off a limb and carry it away as a trophy. The cab driver frowned in the rearview mirror at the strange boy and girl he was carrying. It was a sensitive subject, the murders of the last few weeks. He knew the old man and had driven him around Jericho several times with his cab. Wednesday noticed the normie's action, so she moved to the middle seat right next to Luke. Their conversation was not to be overheard by a normie, and it was best to be close enough to whisper. Luke was surprised to be so close to Wednesday, but she didn't seem at all fazed, so he said nothing and waited for her to speak. These days, in addition to researching Crackstone, I looked for information on the Hyde, whispered Wednesday. Knowing that the murderer was a Hyde, it was the most logical thing to look for information on your enemy. She didn't think it was a coincidence the appearance of a murderous Hyde just at the same time the prophecy appeared in her that would destroy Nevermore. Did you find anything useful? Asked Luke, noticing something strange moving around Wednesday's shoulder. Looks like she brought the living hand. Luke thought, yes, I went back to the Nightshade Society's secret library, behind a painting of an alumnus. I found a safe, and it was the personal journal of Nathaniel Faulkner, the founder of Nevermore, Luke said, and Wednesday nodded. In the journal, he traveled the world cataloging every outcast community. One of them was the Hydes, where he included a lot of information. Wednesday said, there wasn't a lot of public information about the Hydes. It was a sensitive subject because of their aggressive nature. At Nevermore there were no classes about them. There were even students who hopefully only knew the name and that they were some kind of monster. Wednesday began to relate information about Hyde to Luke during the drive. In his journal, Nathaniel explained that Hyde lies dormant within the outcasts until they are either unleashed by a traumatic event or unlocked through a chemical stimulus or hypnosis. If the latter, they form strong bonds with their liberators, whom they see as their masters. Some outcasts are Hydes and never release their monstrous form, living as normies, albeit with enhanced physical abilities like the other outcasts. It's pretty much the same as in the series. Just slight changes. I'm surprised she's telling me, Luke thought. It's the first time Wednesday has talked to him this much. The difference was that Wednesday found the diary much earlier compared to the series. She didn't need her Uncle Fester's help. So, what do you think? Asked Wednesday, finishing telling Luke everything about the Hydes. From the information you gave me, it's pretty obvious. A puppet master is controlling that monster. The murders have a purpose. That's why he must order Hyde to mutilate his victims and take the mutilated part with him. Luke whispered back, exactly, I think so too. Wednesday said, it was good to have someone smart pick up on things quickly like she did. To be sure, we should wait for the third victim. If that person is mutilated, this theory we can take as true, she added. No need, that's true, although I would have confirmed the theory that way too, Luke thought with a nod. Just then they arrived at Pilgrim World, which had several people lined up. Not that many though, as the day was horrible, and it wasn't the best time of year for sightseeing. Luke and Wednesday half paid and got out of the cab. They both looked toward the Pilgrim settlement. Here we are. For a reenactment, it's not bad at all, Luke commented, looking straight ahead. Let's get in line and get it over with as soon as possible, said Wednesday. Walking toward the line, she didn't like being in a place that killed the mostly outcast natives and treated them like friendly settlers. The entrance is marked by a tall rustic wooden gate flanked by two primitive-looking watchers. A sign above the gate reads Pilgrim World and below it hangs a banner welcoming visitors. The line moved quickly. They encountered a middle-aged woman dressed as a pilgrim sitting at an old wooden table. Each individual ticket costs $29.95. If you are a couple, there is a 15% discount. You pay in total $50, said the woman in a tired voice. She seemed to be fed up with this job. We are cool. Before Luke could finish his sentence, Wednesday elbowed him in the ribs. Luckily, Luke with his hockey managed to catch her elbow, which although small was aimed at a sensitive area. If she had hit him, he would have felt a sharp pain and coughed for several minutes. What are you doing, love? Said Luke with a smile. Shut up. We're not a couple. 2 single tickets, Wednesday said nonchalantly, retracting her elbow and pulling out money. It's hard for her expression to change, Luke thought, pulling out his wallet to pay for the ticket. The woman said nothing. She didn't have the energy for weird teenage nonsense. She took the money and gave them 2 tickets. We could have saved $5 each, Luke complained as he walked into the venue next to Wednesday. For a famous writer, you're pretty cheap. Wednesday said, looking around the venue. Inside the compound, wooden buildings with slanted roofs and weathered shingles are visible. The structures appear crudely and functionally built, with a design that reflects 17th century architecture, in addition to people in normal dress. There were others dressed in period clothing, bringing the town to life. I'm not cheap. If I can save, I'd rather do it. It was just pretending for a few seconds. I doubt the pilgrim lady could have read your expression and realized we were a fake couple, said Luke. Shaking his head, Wednesday remained silent. If the lady was suspicious, we could have held hands for a few seconds and saved ourselves $10, Luke added with a slight smile. I'll give you $10 if you'll shut up and drop the subject, Wednesday said with a slight frown. Fine, Luke said, holding out his hand. Wednesday looked at Luke's palm, unable to believe how shameless this kid was. Sighing internally, she pulled out a tenner and placed it in Luke's hand. You sure are annoying when you want to be. Come on, let's stop wasting time. Wednesday said, she's still a human who can get pissed off, Luke thought, pocketing the $10 and following Wednesday. Thing who was hiding on Wednesday's shoulder couldn't believe everything that happened since he got in the cab. First Wednesday's question to Luke, starting a casual conversation. Then Wednesday's approach, although this was so the normie wouldn't hear them. Now Wednesday giving him $10 instead of sending this guy to hell like she always does. Chapter 89, Pilgrim World. Welcome to Pilgrim World. Witch trials every day, 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Exclaimed a bearded old man in pilgrim garb. Trials against witches who were almost certainly innocent. I lose more faith in normies daily, Wednesday commented, looking at the old man with icy eyes. I guess that's normal, Luke said with a yawn. What do you mean? Asked Wednesday. They're weak. If they know a person who can easily kill them, or mind control them, logically, they would want to murder that person no matter how much they have done nothing wrong. To prevent a future crime or something, Luke replied, like in Philip Kindred's book. Although normies can't foresee crimes, Wednesday said, Philip Kindred wrote a science fiction short story called Minority Report. This story features a system in which crimes can be foreseen before they occur, and potential criminals are arrested before they commit the crime. In Pilgrim times there was no such thing, but the normies thought that a person with unknown powers would be a danger to their community, so it was best to kill them. So they were the system and falsely accused many innocent outcasts to murder them and be safe. Exactly, you like science fiction? Asked Luke with surprise. He didn't think Wednesday would understand his reference. I like it, but it's not my favorite genre. Philip has some good novels, though I didn't read all of them, Wednesday replied as she walked down an uneven path, with overgrown vegetation and areas cleared of dirt and gravel. If he'd had a better life, he might have written better novels, Luke said ruefully. Philip was an influential writer in the science fiction genre. Luke read him both in his past life and in this one. In this world he did exist, unlike Stephen King. Mental problems, drug use, suicide attempts, and many disorders, Wednesday said. Philip's life had all the problems or more mentioned for Wednesday. More than a science fiction novelist, he looked like a rock star. He could have lived longer if he'd taken care of himself, Luke said, shaking his head. Maybe all the disorders he had and the drugs he took helped him write and make up stories, Wednesday commented with a thoughtful look, putting her hand on her chin. I hope you don't think about taking drugs to try to write. Or going crazy or anything like that, Luke said, although a normie would most likely think Wednesday was already crazy. I won't. My mind is much stronger than those normie addicts. Wait, how do you know I write? Asked Wednesday, looking at Luke pointedly. From Luke's earlier tone it seemed almost certain that she wrote. Enid told me you have a typewriter, Luke replied, lying through his teeth. With Enid he didn't talk. Only on the day of the harvest festival did they talk, and she made that promise. If they started getting close again, the promise they made was meaningless. So they were still apart. I see, Wednesday said. It seemed odd to her that if they were ex-couples they would be in contact, but she was the least likely to try to understand couple relationships. She saw Enid this morning before she left the room, and she seemed very interested in Luke. So it made sense for them to keep talking. I saw Carrie, the movie that came out recently, Wednesday commented. Thing was again surprised that Wednesday would bring up a topic of conversation again. Oh, what did you think? Asked Luke. It was strange that he could hold such an extended topic of conversation with Wednesday. I guess she talks a lot if it's about novels, catastrophic prophecies, or serial killers. Luke thought. Trash. I hope you didn't help with the movie script, or you betrayed your work. Wednesday replied mercilessly, direct and to the point. I didn't help with the script. I was on Nevermore. I was consulted on almost nothing, Luke said. He knew why Wednesday thought the Carrie movie was garbage. The movie script was not faithful to the book. In his past life, the first Carrie movie was more faithful to the book. This one wasn't. There were a lot of things that Carrie readers didn't like. As for Luke, he couldn't do anything. He had no time, no desire to help with the script. Even the power he had was little, so he couldn't have done much. The script is not faithful, but people liked it. The movie did well at the box office, Luke said with a shrug. A lot of movies do well at the box office and are garbage. This one is no exception, said Wednesday without changing her mind. At that moment Wednesday felt several taps on her shoulder. She knew it was Thing. He was more annoyed than usual today. She was having a nice conversation. Wait. Nice conversation, thought Wednesday, pausing and stopping to listen to Luke, who was saying something about Carrie's movie. Today she had engaged in strange behavior that she didn't understand. Since when did she think the conversation was pleasant? She turned her head and looked at Luke, who also stopped and looked at her. Wednesday asked Luke, "We should look for the clues. Let's stop wasting time," said Wednesday. "Oh, that's right. Where the hell are we?" asked Luke, looking around. They reached the end of the road. The terrain was uneven and overgrown with vegetation. An American flag flew on a flagpole. They had walked without noticing where they were going and ended up in a deserted part of town. "Let's go back," Wednesday said, turning around and walking toward the center of the colonial town. Luke nodded and followed Wednesday. They both kept silent on the way back. "Concentrate. I came here to complete the mission as quickly as possible," Luke thought, just as Wednesday was interested in the conversation and also found such a thing strange. Arriving back in the center of town, they joined a group of tourists being led by a light-skinned woman with reddish-brown hair, pulled back and partially covered by a white cap with scalloped edges. Her eyes are blue and bright, and she has dark, defined eyebrows. "Good morning, everyone. I am Mistress Arlene, a true original colonist. You are about to step back to Jericho's first pilgrim settlement from the year 1625. Follow me," Arlene said with a subtle smile and started walking. Luke and Wednesday followed the group of tourists who had cameras and excited expressions for some reason. "Who's excited to see this?" muttered Luke. "Weird people, I guess," Wednesday replied. Maybe. I think it's weirder for the two of us to categorize people by weird," Luke said with an odd expression. "Look, the cult venue. Inside is a collection of artifacts related to the most beloved and blessed founder, Joseph Crackstone," said Arlene, pointing with her outstretched arm to a building with a pitched roof and weathered shingles. "Blessed? Ignorance is bliss," Wednesday commented in a tone that was heard by the entire group. Arlene and the tourists turned and looked at Wednesday, who was still wearing a stoic, unperturbed expression. Luke was struggling to contain his laughter. He put a hand to his mouth to keep the laughter from escaping. His shoulders were shaking slightly. This girl is very bold, Luke thought. She had called the whole group ignorant fools. And her expression was still the same as ever. She didn't even care that she was being looked at by many strangers with a frown. Arlene took a breath and ignored Wednesday's insult. She continued with her tour. "Any questions?" asked Arlene after she finished her summary explanation of the most important settlements in the pilgrim village. "What artifacts of the pious Joseph Crackstone are on display?" asked Wednesday. The pious part was said in a very sarcastic manner, mimicking Arlene's tone of voice. "Fef." Luke held back his laughter. He stood behind Wednesday so he couldn't be seen laughing. He didn't know that Wednesday also imitated people's tones. She did it very well compared to her usual monotone. It just made them look like they were dumb, making the person she was imitating angry. Arlene had a slight twitch in her left eyebrow. She took a breath again and decided not to start arguing. After all, this rude girl had paid the entrance fee. There are original farm tools, crockery, and even the Crackstone chamber pot, among other things, Arlene replied. The group, including Luke and Wednesday, entered the cult building. Unlike the show, they were not renovating the exhibit. Luke looked at the most important venue in the pilgrim world. It was no big deal. In the center was a creepy low-budget statue of Crackstone, several paintings on the walls, clothing from that era, and little else. "The most beloved? I doubt with that face anyone loved him," Luke commented, and Wednesday nodded in agreement. Arlene and the tourists turned and looked at Luke. They had never seen two people so rude to their ancestors. Luke's face became familiar to many. You could say he is a celebrity in Jericho. He even met the mayor because of the success of his books. Luke and Wednesday continued to examine the building. They came to a large painting where there were several pilgrims, one of them Crackstone, at a bonfire, most likely burning witches or about to. "Pious? A person who burned people at bonfires every day, I doubt is pious," Wednesday commented, and Luke nodded in agreement. "Wait. That's the girl from my vision, and she has the same book," Wednesday thought, opening her eyes. In the farthest frame from the crowd was a blonde girl similar to her holding a book in her hands. Wednesday continued to scan the place until she came to a display case with a black book in the center. It must be the book, Wednesday thought, looking at Arlene, who was explaining to the tourists about a Crackstone object. "Did you find anything?" asked Luke. "Yes, I needed to steal this book. It distracts the tourists. 5 seconds is enough for me. Then meet me outside," said Wednesday. "Okay," said Luke, walking toward the tour group. Chapter 90, Everybody's Stupid, Yes. To distract the tourists, Luke started a debate in which he questioned Crackstone's mercy and pity. Of course, with rude and disrespectful comments. "Get out of this building, you rude boy," exclaimed Arlene indignantly. She would not put up with Luke and Wednesday's disrespectful comments for another second. "You have no valid arguments to counter me, so you use your power as the authority figure of this place." "Fine," Luke said calmly. walking out of the place. He saw Wednesday with the book in her hands. The strange thing was that she was standing in place, flipping through the book instead of running away. 3 minutes after Luke had been ejected from the cult building, Wednesday came out followed by Arlene. "You can't go back in. If there are objects in display cases, there's a reason," exclaimed Arlene angrily, slamming the door shut. "Why did you let them catch you?" asked Luke with a raised eyebrow. "The book is a fake, a cheap replica bought from a place called Etsy." "I doubt that's an excluded settler," Wednesday replied. "Etsy is an e-commerce company. Since you don't use technology, you don't know it," Luke said. "The screaming fake pilgrim said they stole the original." "I doubt that's a coincidence," commented Wednesday with a frown. "Why do you want that book?" asked Luke. "In one of the paintings, a woman is holding that book. The name of the book is Codex Umbrama. It's Latin for Book of Shadows. We came here to look for objects that contain useful information from Crackstone. I think a book falls into that category." "Don't you?" said Wednesday. "I don't suppose she's going to tell me she has visions," thought Luke, nodding. "Now what? Shall we go around and see if we can find anything?" asked Luke. "Then the house of worship should be all the important objects, but it wouldn't hurt to take a walk around so we don't skip anything," thought Wednesday. "Let's take a walk," nodded Wednesday, starting to walk. An hour later they walked around Pilgrim World. They found nothing useful. The information the employees were telling was false, saying that Crackstone and his followers were good people with no evil. The only good thing for Luke in this lost time and this far since he knew about Crackstone was chatting with Wednesday about various topics such as novels, murders, and about the prophecy itself. Luke never thought there would come a day when he would talk so much with Wednesday, though her comments were always blunt and radical. "Well, we need to find the person who stole the book. I guess it will have something to do with the murders," Luke commented, sitting on the edge of the path that was made of wood. Wednesday was sitting next to him in silent thought. "Do you think that person is the one controlling the Hyde?" asked Wednesday, turning her head like a robot and looking at Luke. "It is," Luke thought. He knew the person who stole the book was Marilyn. The Book of Shadows belonged to Goody Adams. In that book, she explained how to bring a person back to life in zombie form. "Funny, Marilyn will revive Crackstone using the book of witchcraft of the person who sealed him," Luke thought with a hand on his chin. Now that he thinks about it, the person who created such a bloody ritual was Goody. That is to say that to revive a person in zombie form you must murder several people and mutilate them, using those body parts in the ritual. "Very dark and creepy," Luke said Wednesday, since the boy wasn't responding. "Oh, sorry, if we confirm the theory that the Hyde is being controlled, which makes the most sense, the person who stole the book is likely involved. Think about it, Pilgrim World has been open for decades. The original book should have been in that display case a long time ago. Just now it gets stolen, and murders start happening in Jericho. A Hyde on the loose and a prophecy that features a genocidal pilgrim," Luke said. "That's true. I'm amazed at your level of deduction," Wednesday said, looking at Luke like a weirdo. "Did you think I was stupid?" asked Luke with an odd expression. "I wouldn't use the word stupid. But yes, I usually think that about everyone I meet," said Wednesday. "That's why you don't have any friends." "Well, who am I to talk about friends?" thought Luke. Wednesday in a conversation was direct and did not hold back when speaking. Many times she would end up insulting you or your beliefs directly or indirectly. Although she didn't do it on purpose, it was what she believed, and she said it. Luke didn't care and could take her comments. He talked that way too, so he wouldn't get mad if someone told him, for example, that Carrie's movie was garbage. Who would say that last bit offhandedly to the writer of said work? "Well, it was just logical reasoning. It's not too hard to come to that conclusion," Luke said. He didn't want to take credit for something he already knew from watching the series. "Maybe so, but look at Xavier and Enid. They know about the prophecy. They heard Rowan say that Nevermore would be destroyed by me and that you were involved too. However, they did nothing. They go on with their colorful, happy teenage lives. That's what I mean by stupid. Usually everyone would act that way," Wednesday said. "You're insulting my ex-girlfriend and my friend." Luke thought but said nothing. He understood Wednesday's reasoning. At that moment, Wednesday began to notice things, jerky shoulder movements, as he seemed to have had enough of hiding. Wednesday looked around, and there was no one there. There was only them. It was a remote part of the Pilgrim World with no major attraction. So she let Thing out to get some air. Luke watched Thing curiously. It was the first time he had seen a hand move on its own. Thing was also watching him. He was curious about the person who could talk so long with his mistress. It was the first time he had witnessed something of this caliber. "Was he ever attached to a human body, or did he originate as an independent creature?" asked Luke, observing Thing lying on Wednesday's delicate shoulder. "Its nature is a mystery to me. My parents won't tell me, and he won't talk about it either, no matter how much torture I perform." I deduce that he's some kind of independent creature, since he's not the only one I saw, Wednesday replied. Oh, I wonder how he reproduces with any specific finger, or does it have a hole that isn't visible unless he shows it, Luke said, and Thing pulled his middle finger out. He's sensitive to those issues. Don't let his rude behavior anger you, Wednesday said, looking sideways at Thing's middle finger pointed at Luke's face. If your personality doesn't make me angry, I doubt Thing who can't talk will, Luke thought. Luke and Wednesday heard the sound of several footsteps. They turned their heads and noticed 3 boys dressed as pilgrims heading towards them. Those are the normie bullies from the show, thought Luke with little interest in some normies. In the series, Wednesday beat the 3 of them up. 3 guys want to beat up a girl who's 5'5" tall. Even the bullies at his school couldn't bring themselves to be so brazen. Their auras could never recover from such a thing again. Hey you two, said the mayor's son. His name is Lucas Walker. His skin is black, with black eyes and black hair. He wore a black top hat and monochromatic robes from the Pilgrim era. His 2 friends were dressed alike. What do you want, Pilgrim? Asked Luke, standing up. He knew these 3 idiots were coming looking for trouble. The best thing to do would be to beat them up quickly and leave Pilgrim World. We heard what they said in the worship building. You insulted these lands in Crackstone, said a stocky, pot-bellied boy. His name is Carter. Oh yeah, so, asked Luke with a raised eyebrow. You must take it back and then take a beating, said the other boy. This boy was the tallest of the group. His name was Jonah. Pfeff, Luke couldn't hold back a laugh as he looked at the group of normies in front of him. What are you laughing at, weirdo? We know you're Luke Poe, the writer who goes to that weirdo school. Walker asked with a frown. Sorry, Luke said, taking a breath and putting on a straight face. Then a sneer appeared on his face. 3 pathetically dressed people say they want to beat me up. Do you understand why I'm laughing, you idiot? Said Luke, taking a step forward and looking at the mayor's son. His height is superior, so his gaze is downward. Who you calling an idiot? Exclaimed Walker angrily, throwing a punch at Luke. Chapter 91. The first smile Luke saw Walker's punch in slow motion. Normies were very slow. Natasha's and any other outcast's punches were much faster. He dodged the punch with ease. He didn't even use his observation hockey. A normie's speed was inferior to his. If he had known this, he could have faced the bullies of the past with his physical power alone, but he was never a person who trained his body and did not know any martial arts. After dodging the punch, he extended his arm and grabbed Walker by the neck. He lifted him off the ground and began to choke him. Walker struggled to free himself, but every effort was futile. Luke's grip had an unreal strength. Let go, freak, shouted Carter and Jonah. Lunging towards Luke to free their friend, Wednesday stopped watching the silence and lunged towards the 2 boys who glared at her with contempt. However, a punch from the girl knocked Carter out in seconds. The pilgrim's body fell to the ground, unconscious. Jonah looked at this in shock and disbelief, but he could think no more. He already had Wednesday in front of him, about to attack him. He decided to throw a punch with all his might at the girl's face. Wednesday dodged the punch with the greatest of ease. She grabbed Jonah's arm to put him in a headlock, but just then she had a vision. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she was knocked unconscious. Jonah looked at this with bewilderment but took the opportunity and took Wednesday hostage. He looked over at Luke and saw that he was still choking his friend bit by bit. Let him go if you don't want your girlfriend to get hurt, yelled Jonah, grabbing Wednesday by the neck. Luke turned his head and noticed Wednesday unconscious and captured by the normie. He stopped straining and released Walker, who fell to his knees, coughing and catching his breath. Division now, thought Luke, looking at Wednesday unconscious. He looked at Jonah's ugly hand holding Wednesday's neck and frowned. For some reason, he didn't like that this stinky normie was touching Wednesday. His relaxed attitude changed to one of little patience. Good. Now, before Jonah could finish his sentence, he saw Luke's fist coming towards his face until bam, his nose broke, and he felt a pain in his face until he was knocked unconscious like his friend Carter. Luke caught Wednesday so she wouldn't fall to the ground. He grabbed her by the waist and looked at her face, which looked asleep. Wednesday opened her eyes slowly. The first thing she saw was Luke's torso just inches away from her. She looked up and saw Luke's blue eyes watching her. She also noticed Luke's 2 hands on her slender waist holding her. Are you okay? You were knocked unconscious out of nowhere, Luke asked. Wednesday noticed Jonah on the ground with a broken nose and unconscious. She understood the situation instantly. Because of her visions, she was knocked unconscious for a few seconds. So she was caught by the normie boy and Luke saved her. Saved by a man, Wednesday thought, cursing her psychic visions. It's nothing, Wednesday said, pushing Luke away with her hands and stopping him from. She wasn't used to so much physical contact. Luke didn't make a big deal about it. He didn't expect to receive Wednesday's thanks. Without a word, he walked over to the normie who took Wednesday. He bent down and looked at him more clearly. His nose was broken from the blow he had received. However, he was still breathing. Should I kill him? Wondered Luke, reaching out his hand towards Jonah's face. His eyes were cold, and he was really debating whether he should kill this normie and his other two friends. Stop, Luke, Wednesday said, and Luke's hand stopped mere inches from Jonah's neck. While I second the motion of what you're about to do, it's not the time. Look around, Wednesday added. Luke noticed that several normies had seen the altercation and were watching them. Luke clicked his tongue, stood up, and started walking toward the exit of Pilgrim World. You must remember what I told you the other time, said Wednesday, following Luke. What thing? Asked Luke. You must be meticulous, even more so if you want to murder someone. You can't do it in a public place with so many eyes in broad daylight, Wednesday replied, as if what she was saying was the most normal thing in the world. Yeah, I know. How did you know I wanted to murder him? Asked Luke with a raised eyebrow. When he was debating whether or not to murder that normie, his expression remained the same as ever. He didn't have a psycho look or a crazy grin. I don't know, I only knew when I saw your face. Strange, Wednesday thought with a thoughtful expression. Never mind, I have some good news, said Wednesday without answering the question. What is it? Asked Luke, curious. The good news from Wednesday was strange, most likely a calamity for someone else. The normie you wanted to kill will be dead in a couple of hours, and you won't have to do anything. Isn't that good news? Replied Wednesday, and a smile was forming on her attractive face. Wednesday was very popular, although she didn't know it, nor did she want it. Her appearance was unique and very attractive. Her smile would make many guys fall in love, but she never smiles. She only smiles when talking about a shady subject like the future murder of a person. As Luke expected, the good news would be a calamity for someone else. But that didn't matter much to him. He was more surprised to see Wednesday's smile. It wasn't a traditional smile showing teeth. Her lips were closed, and a soft curve formed on her face, barely lifting the corners of her mouth. No words, huh? Said Wednesday, thinking Luke was surprised by what she just told him. Though it wasn't because of that, it was because of her smile. Yeah, right. How do you know that? Can you see the future? Asked Luke, snapping back to reality. Telling him won't change anything. Besides, the principal already knows, Wednesday thought. I'm a dual aura user. In addition to the black aura, I possess a violet aura that I awakened a short time ago. When I touched that normie, I had a vision of his future in which he dies, Wednesday explained. I see. How accurate are your visions? Asked Luke. Now, he was interested. This normie wasn't supposed to die in the Netflix series. It was a new occurrence. They are not 100% accurate, but always what I see will happen. It can be changed. At the Harvest Festival, I saw Rowan being killed by an unknown monster, but you saved him. Another day, I saw an old man being run over by a tractor, and within the hour I returned to the scene and it happened, Wednesday replied. A very convenient power. You can see a few hours into the future and if you want to change it. Luke said yes, although not everything is clear in the visions. The cause of death is sometimes unclear, and I only see the person's last moments of suffering. Also, it's not good to be knocked unconscious by touching a person or an object, Wednesday said with a slight grimace. I see. Were you able to see the cause of the normie's death? Asked Luke. Yes, here's the real good news. That normie will be killed by Hyde in the forest. We will be able to observe and confirm our theory, replied Wednesday. Luke understood what she meant. She wanted to observe the murder from afar and see if the Hyde mutilated a part of the normie's body and took it with him. If this happened, they could confirm that the Hyde was collecting body parts for a purpose. This would mean that the Hyde is being controlled by a person. As the beast does not seem the intelligent type to take body parts from its victims, the information in the Nevermore founder's diary about the Hyde would be confirmed. That's why Wednesday smiled. She could confirm her theories and also witness a murder of a person who wanted to hit her and touch her while she was unconscious. Then we should wait for him to leave Pilgrim World and follow him. It is almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In 2 hours, the place closes, Luke said, looking at the time on his cell phone. Wednesday nodded. She had to be patient and put up with being in this irritating place for 2 hours. But she would. To waste time, they headed to a Pilgrim era tavern to eat. Since they hadn't eaten anything in a while, the food was based on that era and was horrible. They both criticized the culinary art of the Pilgrims but ate it since they paid and were hungry. The waiters hated this couple of teenagers, so rude and outspoken, but they were customers, they couldn't throw them out. As dusk began to fall, the visitors began to leave the site. Luke and Wednesday hid and followed Jonah closely. On his face, he had a bandage on his nose. Even though his nose was smashed, he had to keep working. They were not discovered by anyone as Wednesday used her stealth ability on Luke and her. They were imperceptible to the eyes of the normies, as if they melted into the shadows and became almost invisible. I need this for when I take the pictures of the Spellmans. Luke thought in amazement at the stealth ability. The more night it was, the more efficient the skill became. Another surprising thing is that for the ability to also envelop Luke, he had to be close to Wednesday. And she agreed. Let's get closer. The other two are already gone. Only he is left, Wednesday said and started to move. Luke quickly followed her so that the ability would continue to affect him. Jonah was alone with a broom cleaning the pilgrims' toilets. He cursed under his breath. Why did I get to clean toilets today? Stammered Jonah angrily. The day couldn't get any worse. A couple of weirdos beat him up, and now he would be going home later. He didn't know that a couple of weirdos were watching him very closely. Chapter 92's Unusual Connection. He is the last pilgrim left. The bus doesn't run anymore. He'll most likely walk back. His death is imminent, Luke whispered, and Wednesday nodded. All indications were that this normie would die on his way home from the Hyde attack that had not killed anyone in a while. Luke further expanded his domain and discovered the Hyde in the forest. He had already fought the monster once. He knew him if he saw him. His presence was different and similar to Tyler's in human form. I wonder if Marilyn injected him with the enhancing drug. Luke thought, if so, the Hyde would be more powerful. Are we going to let Hyde kill him? Asked Luke, and Wednesday looked at him with her usual blank expression. Now you feel sorry for him and want to save him? Asked Wednesday. If the answer were yes, she would be disappointed in Luke. It never crossed her mind to save the normie. Rowan tried to save them since they were psychic classmates, but this normie was the typical bully that always bothered her and her little brother. She felt no pity, and besides, his death served to confirm some things for her. So it wouldn't be in vain, though the normie doesn't know that. Of course not, but if the Hyde maims him, it won't be good for him to have another part for whatever it is he's looking for, as Luke replied. You're right, it won't be good for him to take the mutilated part. Once he does, we will attack him. Our objective will be to get the mutilated part out of him, Wednesday said, and Luke nodded. Although we'll also be able to follow him and see where he goes. Maybe it will lead us to the person controlling it, Wednesday added with a hand on her chin. She didn't think she'd be able to get to the bottom of the mystery today. That won't be good, Luke thought. He planned to drag out Crackstone's return as long as possible, so he could collect evidence more meticulously. How will we follow the Hyde? You saw his speed, agility, and his leaps if he wanted to run away, Luke said. Isn't it obvious? You flew Rowan the other time. We can do the same, Wednesday said. Obviously she wouldn't ride on Luke's back like Enid. If I want to carry someone with me at high speed, I can't carry them like Rowan. You should get on my back, Luke said without lying. To follow the Hyde without losing him, he would have to go at top speed. If Wednesday got on his back, he could go at his top speed. However, if he had to carry her floating like him, he wouldn't be able to go as fast, since he would have to control the flight of two people at maximum speed, and it's not that advanced yet. Wednesday was silent and thought. She didn't like physical contact with people, not even her parents. Going on Luke's back and hugging him so as not to fall would be something she can't tolerate. Although of all the people she knows, she feels Luke has the highest possibility for her to do that. Change of plans. We'll just take the mutilated part out of him so he won't serve his purpose, Wednesday said. Fine, Luke said. In a normal situation, he would mock Wednesday by telling her that he doesn't mind her hugging him. But he'd rather not. If she changes her mind, his plans will go down the drain. His help will make Wednesday solve the mystery super fast, and he doesn't want that. Finally, Jonah left Pilgrim World. It was already dark. Since it was winter, it was getting dark earlier than usual. The normie pulled out his cell phone and tried to call a cab, but he had no signal. Fucking shitty place, Jonah muttered, putting his cell phone away and starting to walk along the roadside. He had a long walk ahead of him. The last bus had missed him, and he had no signal to hail a cab. For a relaxing walk, I need my little friend, Jonah thought, pulling a cigarette and lighter out of his pocket. He lit it and began to smoke. Is that cannabis? Thought Luke. He knows there's a killer in Jericho, and the idiot walks around at night on a deserted road getting high. He deserves what's about to happen to him, Wednesday commented. Don't be mean. Maybe his stupid brain can't think of so many things at once, and he forgot about the killer, Luke commented with a slight smile. That's true. I didn't think of that possibility, Wednesday said. Luke and Wednesday followed Jonah a distance of about 10 yards. Their footsteps were unheard thanks to Wednesday's stealth ability. Luke widened his domain and noticed the Hyde getting closer and closer to their location. There were no other presences nearby. That was a good sign, as Atlas, Sabrina, and the other three did not follow Tyler in his Hyde form. This could have been because it was difficult to follow him undetected or he was too fast for them. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Hyde attacks on this day and in the vicinity of Pilgrim World, Luke thought. Marilyn must have heard that Wednesday left Nevermore today since Professor Normie is his dorm housemaster. Wednesday must have told her where he was headed, so it's quite a coincidence that the Hyde attacks today. Marilyn, as a professor at Nevermore, must have easily learned that Luke also left Nevermore today, so this attack by Hyde could have been directed at him, but in the end Jonah will die. A friend of Tyler's, the person who will murder him. Jonah walked calmly as he smoked his marijuana cigarettes. He had no sense of survival whatsoever, alone on the deserted road beside a darkened forest and a killer on the loose in town. At that moment the crack of a branch was heard breaking the silence of the night, a sharp sound that made Jonah stop in his tracks. He turned toward the forest, trying to make out something in the shadows. Luke and Wednesday also stopped and looked at the forest and Jonah. They knew the moment they had been waiting for had arrived. May you rest in peace, Luke thought, looking sideways at Wednesday. He wanted to see the girl's reaction to a murder happening in front of her very eyes. For him, it would be the first experience of something like this. "Hello," called Jonah. There was no answer, just the rustle of the wind through the leaves. Jonah's expression changed to one of caution and fear. It seemed to be in the last moments of his life that he realized the situation he was in. The strange noises continued. A rustle here, a snap there, as if something large was moving through the trees. "Is that you guys, Lucas Carter?" asked Jonah, stepping to the side and moving closer to the forest. With his friends, they always played these kinds of practical jokes. "It's not funny. Come on out," exclaimed Jonah angrily as he walked deeper into the forest. Receiving no sign of his friends, he was about to turn around and head back to the safety of the road. But a deafening roar rented the air, chilling his blood. Grarhow, a monstrous figure, emerged from the trees, its red eyes glowing with inhuman ferocity. It was a beast with grayish skin and claws sharp as knives. Jonah tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat as Hyde lunged at him with terrifying speed. The attack was swift and brutal. The Hyde lunged at the boy, its claws tearing into flesh and its fangs sinking deep. Jonah fell to the ground, his body shaking with pain and terror. The Hyde continued to tear him apart from the ground without stopping. Wednesday's dark eyes didn't blink once as the monster leapt at the normie and began to tear him apart. Luke next to her wore an equally unchanging expression. His blue eyes reflected the same indifference Wednesday felt. To Wednesday, this was nothing more than confirmation of the Hyde theory. As for Luke, he already knew about the theory, but he had no plans to save a normie he didn't know. Thing who was on Wednesday's shoulder seemed to have more of a reaction than the two of them. It wasn't Walker or Carter. "It's your other friend," Luke thought. He wondered how Tyler would feel when he returned to human form. He remembered all the people he's killed. He was a real psychopath, as he enjoyed that, but now he killed one of his school friends. He might come to feel a little guilt, though Luke doubts it. In a moment of curiosity, Wednesday looked away from Luke. It was rare for her to be curious about another person. But there was something about Luke that appealed to her, a coldness and sadism that mirrored her own. She wanted to see how he reacted to this scene. To her interest, Luke didn't look away or show a flicker of compassion. His expression was indifferent like hers. Luke noticed Wednesday's gaze and turned his head slightly to meet her eyes. A spark of recognition passed between them. It was an unusual connection, but a connection nonetheless. They both looked forward again without saying a word. The Hyde had already finished his kill. Jonah's torso was mangled and his eyes were bloodshot and lifeless. The Hyde roared triumphantly and then did what Wednesday and Luke expected. He slashed his claws across Jonah's right arm. His demeanor was much more careful as he cut off the arm. "The theory is correct. He needs his victim's limbs for a purpose," Luke said. Wednesday nodded. "Yes, it is just as we suspected. It seems he has no use for using the same limbs as a victim. His murders have a purpose." Without a word, they both lunged toward the Hyde. Wednesday already materialized her dark scythe. She made a slash and a black blast went into the torso of the Hyde, who had not detected the presence of two people. He was surprised. He trusted his sense of smell and had not noticed anyone. The slash of darkness made a gash in his torso. The Hyde grunted in pain and let go of the arm he was holding very carefully between his teeth. The arm before it hit the ground flew towards Luke and floated close to him. "We can't give you this." "Sorry," Luke said with a slight smile. The best way to see if Hyde increased his power was to fight him. The Hyde restrained his urge to jump up and immediately attack the strangers who stole part of his prey. He recognized them both, the two people who had almost murdered him the last time he went out to assassinate. Their auras were scarier than last time for some reason. They were looking at him as if he were their prey. Luke bent his knee slightly and was about to throw himself at the monster without fear. However, the Hyde turned around and jumped more than 10 meters, disappearing into the forest. With his domain, he watched as the Hyde fled at a very fast and agile pace. The place was strangely silent. Afraid or unwilling to fight Wednesday, wondered Luke. Wednesday is supposed to be saved for last. They must first collect the mutilated parts of several people for the ritual before they need her blood. What do we do with the body? We can't just leave it here. Maybe he'll come back, Luke commented, a little disappointed that he couldn't fight. We can't call the police either. We're too suspicious, Wednesday said, and they both fell silent, thinking. I have an idea, said Wednesday after a few seconds. What is it? Asked Luke. With your telekinesis, apply pressure to the body, compressing it more and more until it is unrecognizable. That way the Hyde, or rather the person controlling him, will have no use for it. Wednesday replied without doubting what she said for a second. Oh, I hadn't thought of using telekinesis for something like that. It's a good idea, Luke said. All I'm saying is a good idea, said Wednesday. Luke sent Jonah's arm toward his body, then he felt the corpse with his telekinesis. He began to apply pressure. Jonah's body, including his arm, lifted off the ground. Bones began to creak and break under the immense invisible force. Flesh compressed and distorted. Internal organs crushed into a grotesque jumble. The sound of bones breaking and flesh tearing filled the air. Wednesday watched curiously. Jonah's body was transformed into an unrecognizable mass. Flesh and bones became more and more compressed, twisting and crushing into a grotesque circle of mangled flesh with no trace of its original form. Wednesday, with a precise cut of her scythe, opened a hole in the ground. With several more blows, she made a deep hole so that no dog could smell the mass of meat. Luke deposited the mass of meat in the hole and closed the hole with the previous soil, leveling the ground. Leaving no trace of what had happened, Luke and Wednesday were silent for a moment longer. Then, without a word, they turned and walked away from the site. Their silhouettes faded into the darkness, leaving behind the murder scene and Jonah's unrecognizable body. As they walked back to Nevermore, Wednesday took one last look at Luke, feeling that strange attraction to him. She had found someone as dark and twisted as she was, and somewhere deep in her mind, that connection sparked something she rarely indulged: curiosity. Chapter 93 Interest. The next day after his strange encounter with Wednesday in Pilgrim World, Luke left Nevermore again. He had to take advantage of Sunday to plant the spy devices on the Faceless One. Wednesday was advancing in the mystery faster than in the series. This was due to two factors: the help Luke provided and the strength she possessed. She could face Rowan, the Hyde, and wouldn't lose like in the series. On the way to Jericho, Luke thought about Wednesday and everything that happened the day before in Pilgrim World. The two had witnessed a murder and then compacted the body and buried it so the Hyde couldn't come back for it. It was strange and creepy. Luke pressed the corpse with his telekinesis until it was compacted into an unrecognizable mass. The idea was Wednesday's. He recalled Wednesday's expressionless face when the normie was being killed by the Hyde, or when he compacted the normie's dead body with his telekinesis. He also remembered Wednesday's face slightly smiling when she told him about the normie's imminent death. For some reason he couldn't get the images of the girl's face out of his head since he arrived at Nevermore yesterday. Was what he felt interest in Wednesday. I need to focus. I can't get distracted when I change the Faceless One's memories, Luke thought. Slapping his face, the taxi driver looked at him with a strange expression but said nothing. Upon arriving in Jericho, he expanded his domain and quickly recognized Deacon and Amaranth watching the cafe where Tyler works. It seemed their routine was always the same, watching Tyler's movements. Although they didn't do it yesterday or lost sight of him when he turned into the Hyde, the speed the monster has when it wants to flee is hard to follow, even for Luke's flight. This time, Luke came 30 minutes before the cafe closed so he wouldn't have to wait so long. 30 minutes later, Tyler left the cafe and headed home. It was Sunday, and there were almost no activities to do on a winter day that quickly turned to night. After work, he would return home to eat, rest, and then sleep, since he had classes on Monday. Amaranth and Deacon watched Tyler's house from a distance. 10 minutes later, Amaranth left the area. Luke was almost certain that the half-blood was heading to the hideout they were using with Atlas and the others. Are they living there? Luke thought with a slight smile. The house where they were staying was the original 1625 Pilgrim Meeting House, the real one, not the recreated one he visited yesterday at Pilgrim World. The problem was that the original house was in extreme disrepair. It's funny to imagine Sabrina living in that house used by vagabonds and drug addicts. The Spellman girl couldn't stand being at Nevermore, so she must hate staying in that rundown house even more. When Amaranth was more than 5 kilometers away, Luke acted. This time, he appeared behind Deacon and touched the back of his neck before he could turn around. Once again, he used his pain induction technique, only this time he made it stronger so his enemy would lose consciousness faster. Deacon collapsed to the ground with spasms. He didn't even see who his attacker was. He He sensed the presence behind him but had no time to turn around. Maybe I should knock him out in a more conventional way. I don't want him to have psychological issues from the mental pain induction, Luke thought. He didn't want his puppet to break too soon. Luke got to work. He erased and created memories in Deacon's mind. He erased the memories of the pain he felt a few minutes ago and made new ones where he carried an ordinary pen with him in his jacket, just because he liked the pen. It took longer than expected. He had to be careful and wanted Deacon to be fully convinced that he had bought the pen and liked it. So Luke took his time. He didn't plant the spy mini cameras. The spy cameras had to be visible to record. If Deacon's companions noticed them, his plan would fail. Once he obtained several recordings of conversations between Atlas, Sabrina, and the others, he would make his move and plant the spy camera on Deacon. But first, he needed to ensure he had audio evidence. All set, Luke thought. Like last time, Deacon regained consciousness and thought everything was the same as before. He only felt a slight headache. 10 minutes later, Luke was back at Nevermore. The pen was one of the most expensive and had an almost undetectable built-in microphone. In a week he would recover it. Wednesday opened her eyes and got out of bed like she did every day, with the same movements. She had had a strange dream. She dreamed of the day before when she visited Pilgrim World. It had been a very fruitful day, and in her opinion one of the best since she arrived at Nevermore. She had managed to confirm several of her theories, bringing her closer to the mystery of the prophecy and the person behind it all. She had been a front-row witness to a murder and had created a deep grave to bury the body of a person, though she unfortunately wasn't the one who killed him. But her dream had focused on something, or rather someone else. Her dream centered on the person who had accompanied her through all these thrilling events, Luke Poe. She remembered Luke's expressionless face as he witnessed the murder, how he had wanted to kill a normie in broad daylight, how he compacted the corpse with his telekinetic powers. She could only say one thing: fascinating. This feeling was strange to her, and at times she didn't like it and wanted to bury it deep in her consciousness, but she couldn't get the images of the previous day out of her mind. Am I interested in him? Wednesday asked herself, looking at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, and she wore an expression that was hard to discern. No, I need to train, Wednesday answered herself. Splashing cold water on her face, she dried off and started heading to the gym where they practiced fencing. 2 hours later, she returned to her room. She saw Enid awake, sitting on her colorful bed and chatting with Thing. Wednesday couldn't understand how Thing had become such good friends with this girl, although she had been trying to improve her treatment of Enid and had gradually come to consider her a friend. Enid looked at Wednesday and immediately stood up. You traitor, Enid exclaimed. Explain yourself. I don't read minds, Wednesday said, starting to search for clothes in her wardrobe. She had sweated a lot during training and would take a bath. You said you wouldn't have a date. But it was, Enid explained indignantly. Wednesday sighed internally. She didn't want to have this annoying conversation, but Enid had already positioned herself in front of the door. What nonsense did you tell her, Thing? Wednesday asked, glaring at Thing threateningly. She thought the damn hand had sworn loyalty to her, but here it was, causing trouble. Thing hid behind Enid. Since Enid had helped convince Wednesday to let Thing accompany her, she decided to tell Enid what Luke and Wednesday had done in Pilgrim World, skipping the scary parts. Like the normie's death and how Luke left the corpse. He told me that you two walked around Pilgrim World, ate, and talked about many things. In my world, that's known as a date, Enid said, listing all the things Wednesday and Luke did with her fingers. I get your point. But that's not it. We had to spend time in Pilgrim World for a reason, Wednesday said, stopping Enid, who continued talking without pause. What reason? Enid asked. Ask your ex-boyfriend yourself, Wednesday said, emphasizing the word ex-boyfriend. She stopped a short distance from Enid, and the two girls stared at each other. The atmosphere in the room seemed to drop in temperature. After a few seconds, Wednesday circled Enid and left the room. Why did I act that way? Wednesday thought, shaking her head. She was already tired of thinking about these average teenage problems. She needed to focus on the prophecy and improve her strength for what was coming. Enid remained frozen in place. She didn't like the word ex-boyfriend at all. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to Luke. She needed to ask him the reason Wednesday didn't tell her. Chapter 94. Talk with Enid. Luke returned to Nevermore and received a message from Enid. He hadn't chatted with her in a long time. She wanted to see him to talk. I sent the message an hour ago. I hope she's not mad, Luke thought, telling her he was now free. In 15 minutes, they found themselves in the secondary gym, which was always empty on Sundays and more so in winter. Few outcasts trained their skills as well as Luke or Wednesday without missing a day. Luke looked at Enid nervously. He didn't know why he felt that way. Yesterday, he had witnessed a murder and compacted a corpse and felt nothing, but now just seeing Enid's face made him nervous and expectant of what would happen. "How have you been? Did you train these days?" asked Luke, starting the conversation. "Good, yes. I trained," replied Enid, who was lost in her thoughts. As for training, she didn't lie. Since the promise she made with Luke, she didn't miss a day in training. "I wonder if she will have succeeded in becoming a wolf," Luke thought curiously. He knew it was a sensitive subject, so he didn't ask. Wolf maturity occurs at the age of 15 years as a rule. When the outcasts of this species reach that age, their bodies begin to change rapidly. The need to transform begins to manifest itself more and more, almost uncontrollably. "Did you want to talk?" asked Luke, and Enid looked at him for the first time. "Yes." "Did you go to Pilgrim World with Wednesday yesterday?" asked Enid. "Did you hear about it?" "Yes, we went to find out about the prophecy Rowan talked about," Luke replied. There was nothing to hide. Enid had heard about the prophecy at the Harvest Festival. How did it go?" asked Enid. "Good, we were able to confirm some theories," Luke replied vaguely. If possible, he would avoid telling the part about the murder and the compacting of the corpse. He knew Enid didn't like that stuff and didn't know what kind of face she would look at him with if he told her that. You could say he feared Enid's reaction. "Did you go to confirm theories or have a nice day out?" asked Enid with a slight frown. Luke raised an eyebrow at Enid's sudden hostile tone. He already understood where this conversation was headed, before he could explain himself. Enid continued speaking. "Thing told me everything. You two ate together, walked around, and talked about a variety of subjects. Weren't you going to look for information about the prophecy?" "It sounds more like a date than a mission," Enid protested. She knew she was Luke's ex-girlfriend. In the past she would not have protested, nor would she have complained to him. She hadn't been with the girls he dated since the new year started. Now, however, it was different. They made a promise, and she thought Luke would stop dating girls. "It's not what you think." "Enid, we had to stay longer at Pilgrim World for a reason," Luke said. "What reason?" exclaimed Enid, more annoyed for strange reasons unknown to Luke. "Does polygamy accepted?" "She's very jealous," Luke thought, seeing that it would be impossible for Enid to accept his having multiple wives. Luke thought for a few seconds how to explain to her that Wednesday had a vision of a murder a few hours later. He managed to tell her without telling her that Wednesday had a double aura. He wouldn't go telling other people's secrets to others, let alone Wednesday. It was already a big breakthrough for her to tell him. Unfortunately, to tell her the whole story and get Enid to leave her jealousy behind, Luke has to tell her about the murder of the normie at the hands of Hyde. He also told her why he and Wednesday didn't intervene. He had to tell her everything they knew about the prophecy. So it was a longer talk than expected. Enid, who knew this information, asked what they did with the body, since if the Hyde wanted to take a mutilated part, they couldn't just leave it lying there. "Well, that," said Luke, with no choice but to tell her the method they used. Enid put on a disgusted expression as she heard how Jonah's body ended up. Luke finished telling her everything, and the place went silent. "If you want to cancel the promise, I won't get mad," Luke said, breaking the silence and not making eye contact with Enid. "Huth, why?" asked Enid, confused, looking at Luke. "What I did was inhumane. I was able to save the normie, but I only watched as he was killed, and then I compacted his body and buried it so it wouldn't be found. You could consider me a monster or psychopath for that." Luke replied. He felt no remorse or guilt for what he did, but he understood that for other people it would be hard to digest, and they would label him as a monster. Other people's opinions didn't matter to him, except for Enid's. "You're not a monster, not a psychopath," Enid said, walking up to Luke and taking his hand. "You saved me many times, not just me. Bianca Divina Yoko, that girl Gia. At the Poke-Up, thanks to you, there were no more victims. For me, you're a hero, my hero," Enid added with a cute smile full of love as she looked at Luke. Although she couldn't deny that she did feel something negative about the actions Luke and Wednesday committed. "I've never been told something so corny," Luke said, feeling a warm feeling in his chest. It was a nice, comforting feeling. The boy who coldly observed a murder and compacted a corpse without hesitation was now excitedly looking at the girl in front of him. "Shut up, you'll have to get used to those comments with me," Enid said with a giggle and slowly moved her face closer to Luke until she started kissing him. Luke accepted the kiss and enjoyed it. He longed for Enid's lips. Enid gradually increased the intensity of the kiss. At one point she sat on top of Luke and began to kiss him with tongue and more passion until she pulled him down on the floor. "Whoa, this is escalating fast," Luke thought in surprise at Enid's intensity. "She's never been this intense." "Hey Enid, wouldn't it be good to get undressed in this cold and in this place?" Luke murmured awkwardly as Enid's lips wouldn't come off his. He noticed that Enid wanted to unbutton his jacket. Enid, realizing the situation, pulled away from Luke. "Oh, I'm sorry, I got carried away," Enid said, wiping her saliva with a slight blush. "Teenagers. Both normies and outcasts. deal with hormones and changes. Werewolves deal with them too. Not only that, they also intensify. Their hormones are more potent compared to other outcasts. The desire to mate, hunt, and feed increases and is harder to control. Enid is no exception. We can go to my room. I'll tell Xavier to go play somewhere else, Luke suggested. Enid wanted to say yes, but she controlled herself. She didn't want to have her first time with Luke like this. Being an ex-couple, no. Once I defeat that monster, you'll tell me why you dumped me. After that we'll get back together, and at that time we will. That's a promise, Enid said. Let me help you train so you can defeat him faster, Luke said with a slightly playful smile. Shut up, Enid said with a smile, lightly tapping Luke's shoulder. Luke and Enid stayed a while longer. They knew they would never get together like that again. They had to respect the promise, for now they were still apart, and they would be breaking their word if they started seeing each other like before. The days passed at Nevermore. Christmas and New Year's were getting closer and closer. The Hyde did not attack again. His last 2 attacks had been a failure. That was not the only reason for his low profile. The Hyde was identified by several students: Luke, Wednesday, Xavier, Enid, Yoko, etc. This came to the attention of Principal Weems and the Nevermore board, the people above the principal. Knowing that there is a murderous Hyde on the loose lurking around Jericho, the Nevermore board and Larissa take matters into their own hands by contacting the outcast police. The outcast police sent 2 of their officers to get more leads on Hyde, as they did not believe it was just a mad Hyde. They knew the characteristics of the Hydes, and there could be someone manipulating the monster. Having 2 outcast police officers caused Marilyn to move with much more care and planning. Unfortunately, her last attack in Pilgrim World was a failure, and she didn't get the body part, all because of Luke and Wednesday. The outcast police were on her trail, and so was the Adams girl, who was still investigating the prophecy. She knew since she was the boss of her dorm and had talked to her. Now she was in a difficult position and didn't want to draw attention to herself. Her next murder had to be meticulously planned. Fortunately, she had the drug enhancer given to her by the hooded people. Otherwise, she would doubt what Hyde could do against 2 outcast police officers. If her puppet was defeated by 2 Nevermore students, how strong would 2 outcast police officers be? Luke one day after school received a message from Larissa. The principal told him that the outcast police officers who were in Jericho wanted to see him and Wednesday. He had an hour to get ready. Larissa gave him the heads up because she held Luke in high regard, as he was the son of her deceased best friend. Otherwise, she would not have had to give him so much notice. Luke, knowing this, looked for Wednesday. Luckily, she was not in her bedroom. The girl was under an old oak tree, sitting on a wooden bench. Her pale skin contrasted with her dark uniform. Her jet black hair, as usual, is braided in 2 long braids. Her nails, painted a deep black, glide leisurely across the pages of a book. Her dark brown eyes, somber and thoughtful, are fixed on the words, seemingly oblivious to the cold around her. Luke gazed at Wednesday from a distance, for a moment forgetting why he had come. There was something about the stillness and coldness of the scene that was intensely appealing to him. Luke found himself strangely fascinated by Wednesday's serenity, her indifference to the inclement weather, and her complete immersion in reading. What am I thinking about? Luke shook his head several times, wanting to push away these thoughts that lately invaded him. He buried these strange feelings as much as he could and walked toward Wednesday. Nice weather for reading, Luke commented with a slight hint of sarcasm. Wednesday looks up from her book, watching him with her dark, piercing eyes. Her face remains expressionless, but there is a spark of interest in her gaze. Cold and solitude are the ideal conditions. Only then can one truly appreciate the decadence of Gothic literature. Wednesday said in her usual tone of voice, "Is the situation that bad? I thought Anne Rice sold her vampire books well." Luke commented, sitting down next to Wednesday, who didn't mind him sitting next to her. "Anne Rice, really? Her writing is good, but her works have too much eroticism instead of focusing on what's important," Wednesday said disapprovingly. "Take this book," Wednesday said, passing him a book she had beside her. Luke took it and read it. Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Tatarin. "I wasn't expecting a gift from you," Luke commented. "It's not a gift. You'll give it back to me. If I want to have an interesting conversation in the first place, you must read quality Gothic works. You will also appreciate classic Gothic literature," Wednesday said. In her talk with Luke at Pilgrim World, she learned that Luke mostly liked horror literature, which had its differences from Gothic literature. Both literatures share some similarities in terms of themes but have more differences in terms of style, approach, and historical context. "Okay, I'll read it," Luke nodded. "I have something to tell you," he added, looking at Wednesday. "I hope it's something important since you interrupted my reading," Wednesday said. "It is. In an hour, the outcast police officers will call us into the principal's office to talk. The director notified me. It's most likely due to the disappearance of the normie at Pilgrim World, Luke replied. It took longer than I thought, said Wednesday. Yes, but here they are. I was thinking we could prepare the speech we will say so there are no gaps in our lies. What do you say? Asked Luke, looking at Wednesday. After a few seconds of contemplation, Wednesday closed her book and replied dryly, Good. For the next hour, the two were talking about what they would say in their talk or interrogation with the outcast police. For everything to go perfectly, they created lies as to why they went there and stayed so long. It was an interesting talk, although it was cold, but Luke toughed it out and kept chatting with Wednesday. Chapter 95, Advanced Technique. Luke and Wednesday went to the principal's office and met the two outcast police officers. Coincident or not, one of the officers was the same one who had interrogated Luke last year after the Raven Island incident. This officer had given Luke his contact information. Once he had gathered the evidence, Luke had planned to contact this man, but he was already in Jericho. His name was Anthony. He was a middle-aged man with relatively long black hair for a man and an unkempt beard. His partner was a woman slightly younger than him. Her appearance was completely different from Anthony's messy look, but from what Luke could see, she had a lower rank than Anthony since he asked the questions. Luke wasn't sure if it was good or bad that the outcast police were already in Jericho. He had planned to contact them to show them the evidence that the Spellmans were helping to revive Crackstone to kill them. But it wasn't time yet. That they want to kill him isn't the issue, as they're within their rights. The problem is that they are going to revive Crackstone, a normie who killed many outcasts and made deals with demons. Most likely, in addition to Luke, many students at Nevermore will be injured. And there could even be deaths. This crosses the line and would be considered a crime in the eyes of the outcast police. For now, he plans to keep gathering evidence before showing it to Anthony. It would be better if Crackstone were revived, as that would increase the severity of the Spellman's crime. If he shows the evidence now, the Spellmans could be arrested prematurely, and since the crime hasn't been committed, they wouldn't face the same punishments. The outcast police wanted to talk to both of them about the disappearance of a normie several days ago. It was about a normie named Jonah. As Luke and Wednesday expected, it was the normie who had been brutally murdered by the Hyde, which only they had seen. The body hadn't been found, but the boy had been missing for over 2 weeks, which alerted his acquaintances in both the local and outcast police. If there's a serial killer on the loose and someone disappears, it's not a good sign. Why did the agents want to speak with Wednesday and Luke? Because the two of them were at the last place where the normie was seen before his disappearance, Pilgrim World. Nevermore was a boarding school. It was unusual for 2 students to go out on the weekends, and for a normie to disappear that same day. Plus, these 2 students were the ones who had seen the Hyde at the Harvest Festival. The agents didn't think the 2 of them were the killers. But they had their doubts, and maybe they had seen something or gone there for a hidden reason, and that's what they wanted to find out. Luke and Wednesday had already crafted a story about why they were at Pilgrim World, and they answered all the questions perfectly. With their answers matching since they were interrogated separately, the story they created was simple. They had gone to Pilgrim World on a date. It was hard to convince Wednesday to agree to this, but using logic, Luke managed to convince her. He came up with the idea thanks to Enid and the jealousy scene she had caused. Wednesday decided to cooperate with the story because she didn't want the outcast police meddling in her affairs. She was investigating the case, and if they found out, they would most likely order her to stop. To most people, that would seem like a date between a boy and a girl. Both psychics and classmates. It was very believable, of course, unless you knew Wednesday's personality. To the 2 agents, it was just a coincidence that the 2 of them happened to be there. They knew they had arrived late at Nevermore, but most likely they had gone off to make out or do typical teenage things. They were questioned because the agents didn't have many leads on the Hyde in the other events, so maybe they would find something useful, but they had no luck. The following days passed without much change. They had a week off for Christmas and New Year's. There were many snowstorms, and the weather was terrible, so they couldn't go out to continue investigating on Wednesday. On top of that, there was another problem. Wednesday no longer had free days to leave Nevermore. She needed to either get more of those days or come up with believable excuses to be allowed out on the weekend. With the new year underway and classes resumed, Luke had already collected several compromising audio recordings of the Spellmans. The conversations he had gathered were very incriminating. There were names, discussions about Hyde, complaints from Sabrina about why Hyde wasn't killing people, mentions of the Gates family and Marilyn's real name, talk about reviving Crackstone, and more. These recordings spanned several weeks, giving Luke plenty of material. "What do you think of these recordings?" Luke asked, looking at his great-great-grandfather, who had just listened to several of the recordings he had collected. Edgar had guided many Poe descendants in seeking evidence to expose the true face of the Spellmans. So he should be an expert in this matter. They're good evidence, but not the best. They'll help, but you need more solid proof, Edgar replied. Suggestions. Should I plant mini cameras on the faceless one to get videos of their faces and conversations? Luke asked. With the audios he had gathered, it was time to take his spying to the next level. That could work too, but it's not time yet. If it goes wrong, the whole operation could fail. You need to take advantage of the fact that they still don't know about you. You should collect evidence using outcast methods. Not normie methods, Edgar replied with a smile. Use mind control to make the faceless one reveal all the information. Luke said the only idea that came to his mind. No, it won't be believable. You could use your mind control to force him to say those things. But the outcast police won't take it seriously. I'm talking about a more credible technique involving the blue aura, Edgar said with a slight mysterious smile. What technique? Stop being mysterious, Luke said impatiently. Memory extraction. It's an advanced memory manipulation technique. It allows you to extract memories from a person's mind and then project them onto a special device that the outcast police have, Edgar replied. Like the pensieve from Harry Potter, Luke thought with a raised eyebrow. Is it useful? I can create false memories in the subject and then extract them. Normie's videos are much more verifiable, Luke said. False memories are just that, false. They're lies and shallow. If you extract them and place them in the device, the machine will reject them because it detects when a memory isn't real, no matter how perfectly you create the false memory. The device will detect it and won't project it, even if you're a level 7, Edgar said. So it's the most verifiable thing I could show, Luke said with a slight smile. If he extracts the memories from the faceless one, he'll have very strong evidence and won't need much more. Teach me the technique. I'm ready, Luke said. Didn't you hear when I said advanced technique? In my past life I was a telekinetic and clairvoyant. I have no idea how the technique works. I only saw it in action and nothing more. The telepods I taught didn't need that technique. Even your mother didn't learn it, and she's from a family of telepods, Edgar replied, shaking his head. So why mention it? Luke asked, frowning. Even though your mother didn't learn it, that doesn't mean the Umbrio family doesn't possess the technique. Your grandparents must know it. Obtain it somehow. That's your new mission. I expect good news, Edgar said, and without waiting for Luke's grumbles returned to his necklace. For Luke, the only way to get that technique was through Veronica. He had little relationship with his two grandparents. His grandmother seemed to detest him, and he barely spoke with his grandfather during the last holidays. The problem was that Veronica had gotten angry with him for some unknown reason. She had cut off their telepathic link and blocked him on all social networks. So he couldn't contact her. Should I use the video of her with Tommy to get the technique? Luke wondered. It would be sinking very low, as it would mean breaking his word. Moreover, he had deleted the video, so he would need to get a backup from her phone and see if he could find it. Luke decided to try to speak with Veronica the next day. She was a user of two auras, and the Umbrio family treated her as the next family leader, so she should have access to that technique if she wanted. Chapter 96, Master Ability. When classes ended, Luke started looking for Veronica. It wasn't hard to find her. The problem was that she was with her friend Psychovance. Why did she block me on all social media? Luke thought angrily. It would have been much easier to send her a message. He had already beaten up Veronica's friend Psychovance and didn't want to approach to talk. Besides, he noticed that Veronica looked at him and still ignored him. She kept talking as if nothing had happened. What's her problem? Luke thought, frowning as he walked away. He had archery club later. There, he'd tell Daphne to arrange a meeting with Veronica. Daphne was a real friend of Veronica, unlike the Psychophant's servants. The girl who always had a cold expression was in the same club as Luke. In fact, she was the captain of the club, so she had some connection with her. You want to see Veronica? Why don't you talk to her? Daphne asked, pulling out several arrows. All of them had hit the target. She ignores me and blocked me everywhere. I can't communicate with her, Luke replied. Your problem, not mine. Daphne said dryly. Oh, come on, you're her best friend. It's not that hard. Luke insisted. It's strange to see you so persistent. Fine, I'll do it only if you beat me in a little archery competition, Daphne said with a slight, challenging smile. Don't joke. Beat the captain of the archery club, Luke thought with a grimace. I didn't think the great Luke Poe would be scared, Daphne said with a disdainful smile. Luke thought about it. His archery skills had improved, but not to the level of Daphne's. He didn't spend all his time honing that skill. It was just a complement to use with his telekinesis. Although he had never used a bow and arrow in a real battle yet. Fine, but we can use our powers. You use your wind element, and I'll use my telekinesis. What do you say? Luke suggested with a confident smile. Daphne was an orange aura psychic. The element she controlled was the wind. At Luke's suggestion, Daphne frowned. She was 100% confident that she could beat Luke in a normal archery competition. However, she was equally certain that she would lose if they both used their powers. She wasn't foolish. She had been on Raven Island. She fought against two hags while Luke faced the four hooded figures who wanted to kill them. Not only did he win, but he also killed one with his telekinesis. Meanwhile, she and Veronica struggled to fight off two hags. In the end, they needed Brad and Tommy's help to kill them. Their power levels were very different, with Luke being far superior to her. Where did your confidence go? Don't you trust your powers? Luke asked, mimicking Daphne's disdainful expression. I must remind you that you're asking me for a favor, Daphne said, and Luke remembered he should be more pleasant when asking for a favor. An archery competition should be without powers. That's non-negotiable. This is the archery club. Where do you see the word powers? Daphne said, refusing. Luke frowned, but a new idea came to mind. Fine, no powers. But it's not fair for me to face you when you've been practicing archery since you were little. Let me choose a representative to compete in my place, Luke said with a slight smile. As you wish. I'll tell you right now that Xavier won't beat me, Daphne said with a hint of arrogance. She was the best student when it came to archery. She had won countless competitions in the discipline. No one at Nevermore was better than her. I hope you keep that arrogance when you lose, Luke thought as he went off to find his perfect competitor. You want me to compete in your place? Get lost, Wednesday said without a moment of hesitation. 2 favors. 2 rejections, Luke thought. He already wanted to hit his head multiple times. He never asked for favors, and asking for 2 on the same day was a big effort for him. I read the book you lent me, and we even discussed Gothic literature because of it. You owe me a favor, Luke said, going on the offensive. At this, Wednesday looked up from the book she was reading. You borrow a book, and I'm the one who owes you a favor. At no point did I force you to read the book or discuss it with me, Wednesday said, and Luke couldn't counter her argument. Chef stingy, Luke said, turning away. He should just compete himself, lose to Daphne, and endure her arrogant face during the next few meetings at the club. Wait, Wednesday said, standing up and walking toward Luke. She stopped a short distance from him and raised her head to look at him. What? Luke asked, lowering his gaze to look at Wednesday. Their heights were quite different. The girl was about 155 cm, while he stood close to 180 cm. Wednesday remained silent for a few seconds, staring at Luke before responding. I'll fulfill your request if you answer one question. Fine, ask, Luke said, curious about what Wednesday could want to know from him. It had to be about him. It was rare for her to show curiosity about another person. You have to answer truthfully. I'm telling you, I'm an expert at recognizing lies, Wednesday said. That might work with others, but I'm very good at lying, Luke replied with a slight smile. From their closeness, he could hear Wednesday's breathing, and they were standing very near each other. I believe that, but it's hard to fool me, Wednesday said. Looking directly into Luke's eyes, to ensure she wasn't lied to, she had to focus on the person's face and eyes. Ask, do you have 2 auras? Wednesday asked, tilting her head slightly to the side. The place fell silent. They stared at each other, and the only sound was their soft breathing. Yes, Luke replied. What's the second one? Wednesday asked with curiosity. That's 2 questions, Luke said. Do you want the favor or not? Wednesday asked, and Luke clicked his tongue. Blue aura. Why did you think I have 2 auras? Luke asked. Blue ink. I thought it was something else. Wednesday thought, shaking her head internally. Instinct. Have you tried to read my mind? Wednesday asked. No, you most likely have something that protects your mind since you're part of the Addams family. I don't want to get caught reading minds, Luke responded. And the girl nodded. She did have such protection. She wouldn't allow anyone to read her thoughts. Why do you hide it? Wednesday continued with her questions. You also hide that you possess a violet aura. You must have your reasons, right? Luke said without giving a full answer. He had already answered the main question. He wouldn't reveal his entire life. Let's go to the archery club. I want to get this over with quickly, Wednesday said, starting to walk. Luke followed, and neither said a word along the way. When they arrived at the outdoor archery club, many people looked at Wednesday Addams with curiosity. They knew her, it was hard not to. They didn't think Luke could convince this girl, who always had a half-dead expression and kept everyone at a distance, to participate in a mini competition. Did you tell everyone? Luke asked, trying hard not to smile. Yes, it's been a while since we've had a competition, Daphne replied, eyeing her opponent. She knew the girl by reputation but had no idea of Wednesday's archery skills. You'll regret making this competition so public, Luke thought, holding back laughter. Wednesday had been forced to join a club by Principal Larissa. One of the clubs she tried was the archery club. On her trial day, Luke and Xavier accompanied her. No one else saw her perfect abilities. She could even shoot an apple and still hit the most difficult bullseye. Luke wondered if Daphne had this level of skill. The rules are as follows. Daphne began, giving a quick 5-minute explanation. The competition was simple and consisted of 5 rounds. They didn't want it to take too long. Each archer would shoot 3 arrows per round, totaling 15 arrows per participant. The winner would be determined by the accumulated score after each round. Each target was placed 100 meters away, which was farther than the standard 70 meters used in major competitions for normies. The targets had concentric circles with scores ranging from 1 outermost to 10 innermost. Wednesday took Luke's bow and positioned herself. "Do you want to start, or should I?" Daphne asked, looking at Wednesday, who wasn't even wearing the proper uniform and was using a bow she wasn't familiar with. "It doesn't matter, the result will be the same," Wednesday replied. Her goal wasn't to be rude, she was simply stating the truth. The other club members were outraged by this arrogant comment. This girl wasn't even a club member and thought she could beat the captain. "Just as peculiar as always," commented Xavier. Crossing his arms, he and Luke were the only ones who had seen Wednesday's skills. He knew Daphne had a tough challenge ahead. "Fine," Daphne said, not showing a hint of anger. She positioned herself and shot 3 arrows in quick succession. 2 arrows hit the 10-point circle, with 1 arrow having to destroy the other to achieve that. The last one landed in the 9-point zone, a total of 29 points. Everyone applauded and cheered for their captain. With precise and fluid movements, Wednesday placed the first arrow on the bow and shot, hitting the 10-point circle. Unfazed, she repeated the process, breaking the first arrow with the second and then again with the third, all embedded perfectly in the exact center of the target. A total of 30 points, perfect score. The crowd, which had been murmuring negative comments about Wednesday, fell silent. Many rubbed their eyes to see if what they had witnessed was real. "What do you think of my representative?" Daphne's Luke asked with a smile. Watching Daphne's reaction, Daphne just scoffed and repositioned herself at the shooting line. This time she achieved a perfect score as well. However, Wednesday scored another perfect score and everyone watched with wide eyes. In the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, Wednesday consistently scored 30 points. She never missed a shot. The place was silent. She had won the competition with a perfect score. This was at the level of a professional, no, better than a professional, a flawless archery skill. Daphne managed scores between 28 and 30 points but couldn't maintain perfect shots throughout. The final score was Wednesday 150 points, Daphne 146 points. "Done, I don't owe you anything," Wednesday said, handing the bow back to Luke and leaving the place as she had come. The crowd parted to let her pass, and within seconds she disappeared. "I expect the meeting with Veronica tomorrow at 5 p.m. in the secondary gym." "I don't accept tardiness," Luke said, patting Daphne on the shoulder before leaving. Chapter 97, Mutual Help. The next day, Luke arrived at the secondary gym 5 minutes early. A few minutes later, Daphne and Veronica showed up, and when Veronica saw her friend leading her to Luke, she looked at her as if she had betrayed her. "Why is he here?" Veronica asked, crossing her arms and looking at Daphne with a judgmental glare. Daphne was her best friend and she knew she was distraught with Luke, so it felt like a betrayal to bring her here without her knowing. "He beat me in a competition and I had no choice but to bring you here. Argue or whatever, I'm out," said Daphne, who also wasn't in a good mood. Her loss to Wednesday had not sat well with her at all. It was the first time she had lost like that. What's wrong with her? Veronica thought. It was strange to see her best friend in such a bad mood. Although she always had that icy expression on her face, this was different. "Didn't you hear what happened yesterday?" Luke said, noticing Veronica's confused expression. Veronica looked at Luke, contemplating whether or not to speak to him. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she asked what had happened. Yesterday she had been very busy with a task her grandmother had given her and had barely left her room. Luke told her how Wednesday had wiped the floor with Daphne in the archery competition, and all the club members were witnesses. That was the reason for her bad mood. Was there someone so skilled? Veronica wondered, surprised. She had known Daphne since they were kids and knew that she had been practicing from a young age. "Have you already set your claws on another poor girl?" Veronica asked with a judgmental look. "Who do you think I am?" Luke said with a grimace. "A womanizer." Veronica replied without a second thought. Wasn't polygamy a thing? Luke thought, confused. Veronica, Enid, Bianca, and several other girls were very jealous and looked down on womanizers. Maybe it was due to the generational shift. This new generation of outcasts is much more connected with normie culture compared to previous ones, thanks to social media, cell phones, the internet, etc. "If you knew Wednesday, the last thing you'd say is that I'm with her." Luke said, "Enough with the useless chatter. What do you want from me? Another technique as always. You only come to me for blue aura techniques, Veronica said with an offended tone. Seeing Luke's expression, she knew she had hit the mark and that he was only after a technique. I need a technique, Luke said, scratching his cheek. Veronica began to walk away. Wait, didn't you say we were family? Family helps each other, Luke said, grabbing Veronica by the wrist. She and other family members should learn a bit from Dominic Toretto. Veronica turned her head and looked at Luke indignantly. We're family when it suits you, right? I didn't think you were such a shameless womanizer and rude person. Is it so hard to get 2 damn favors? Luke thought, holding back his insults. He put his pride aside to ask for favors, as this technique was crucial for showing 100 real evidence against the Spellmans. Stop insulting me, I have feelings, Luke said, putting on a wounded expression. To his surprise, his act didn't work. Your feelings, stop acting. You're just doing it to manipulate me, Veronica said with a disdainful smile. I need to take another approach, Luke thought. During all the holidays I wanted to integrate you into the family, but you always rejected me in rude ways. Now you want my help? Keep dreaming, Veronica said. Pulling away from Luke's grip, Luke remembered his last vacation at the Umbrio estate. What Veronica said was true. She had always wanted to include him or do activities with him, but he had always rejected her without much tact. Maybe her anger was valid. It's true that I was rude to and Luke began, showing a rarely seen expression on his face. You want, Veronica repeated. I to offer you my apologies. Luke finished the sentence with difficulty. His look of embarrassment seems genuine, Veronica thought, moving closer to Luke to examine his face. She wanted real apologies, not fake ones. Uncle Luke said just before Veronica could accept his apology and close the matter. I thought you wouldn't make excuses, Veronica said with a slightly furrowed brow. Those aren't excuses. At the Umbrio estate, you were the only one who treated me well and wanted to include me. Everyone else hated me. Your father always looked like he wanted to kill me with his gaze. And the same goes for that old woman, Luke said, referring to his grandmother as old woman. This time Veronica was silent, not knowing what to say. Her cousin was right. She had noticed the hostility from everyone towards him. She was the only one who treated him well. Her grandfather barely spoke to him, and everyone else was hostile. If I accepted your invitations, I'd just get more hate and your father would likely reprimand you. Everyone saw me as a calamity for the Umbrio family, Luke continued. Did she care about me? Veronica thought. You're right, Veronica said after a few seconds. She had been in Director Weems's office when Natasha showed Sophie's letter revealing that the Spellmans had made deals with demons. This could drag the Umbrios into a war with the Spellmans, and no one in her family wanted that. Out of the entire Umbrio family, you're the only person I consider family. Well, goodbye, Luke said, turning away and thinking of another way to get the technique. Maybe he should steal from a family of psychics or something similar. Wait, Veronica said, grabbing Luke's wrist. What's wrong? Luke asked, turning around and noticing Veronica's flushed face. He didn't understand why she was blushing. Was his previous comment that cheesy? I'll lend you the technique you need. I can't promise anything. It might be an advanced technique and they might not give it to me, Veronica said. Really? Thanks, Luke said honestly. This would save him a lot of trouble and help him get strong evidence. Don't thank me yet. You'll need to give me something in return, Veronica said. Oh, what do you need? Luke asked. He preferred this arrangement. That way both of them would be even. You have to help me train my green aura, Veronica said with a grimace. All right, what kind of training? Luke asked. Physical training, Veronica said with a disgusted expression. Finally she'll make use of the green aura, Luke thought. Why the sudden change? I thought you hated physical training, Luke said. He knew Veronica didn't like training and building muscles. She was like a princess from an old wealthy family with no interest in combat. My father wants me to improve my physical abilities since I have a green aura that is good for that as well as for at first. I didn't want to. But thinking about it, last year's attack would have been much easier if I had defeated the 2 witches more easily. Veronica replied, I see. You'll have to get rid of those long nails if you want to throw punches, Luke commented with a slight mocking smile. He couldn't imagine Veronica throwing punches and kicks left and right. Shut up. What technique do you need? Veronica asked. After talking a bit more, they parted ways. Veronica told him it would take 2 or 3 days to get the technique if her father agreed to give it to her. Once she got the technique, they would also start Veronica's training. This turned out better than I expected, Luke thought, satisfied as he returned to his dorm. He thought it would take a long time to get the advanced technique, but he would have it in less than a week. As for whether Veronica's father would give her the technique, he had no doubts that he would. Veronica is the spoiled child of the Umbrio family. She is talented, intelligent, and has 2 auras. They see her as the future of the family. If she wants a technique, even if it's advanced, they will give it to her without much hesitation, unlike normies. In the outcast society, there is no 100 patriarchal or 100 matriarchal structure. It all depends on the talent of the marginalized person. If you have 3 siblings and you're a woman, but you have 2 auras and great talent, it's almost certain that you will be the next family leader. Everything operates on meritocracy. In the case of having 2 auras and psychic families, it almost immediately makes you the next family leader. But if the 3 siblings have 1 aura each, the one who shows the most talent will generally take the leadership position. There are cases where a user of 1 aura is more talented and powerful than his or her brother or sister of 2 auras, and ends up being the leader of the family, but it is difficult for a user of 2 auras to be weaker than one who has only 1. 2 days later, Veronica gave Luke an old-looking book whose only content was the memory extraction technique. The problem was that the book had 500 pages just discussing that technique. How many theories and variables could a damn technique have? The content was in a difficult language due to ambiguous words and a convoluted writing style. So far, it was the most challenging book Luke had encountered. His photographic memory was of little use if he couldn't understand the explanations in the book. Fortunately, he had Edgar to help him. He didn't know how long it would take to grasp the theory of this technique. Then he would have to move on to the practical part, which would be even more difficult. Chapter 98's Fencing Tournament 1. A month passed since Luke obtained the memory extraction technique. During this time, he dedicated all his efforts to learning the technique. He continued training his other auras but focused mainly on this damn technique. He managed to read the entire 500-page book. This, with his photographic memory, wasn't a great achievement. The good thing is that he already understood 50s of the book. In a month, that's good progress. He achieved this percentage thanks to Edgar, who, even though he didn't have a blue aura nor a student with this ability, was an excellent teacher and knew about various topics. To fulfill his part of the deal, he helped Veronica train in martial arts. About 3 to 4 days a week, the Umbrio princess had a lot of hidden ferocity for close combat. She already knew martial arts but had never put it into practice because she didn't like fighting that way. With her green aura, she managed to improve her physical abilities at an incredible rate. And in a month, Luke already felt like the distance between the two was shrinking. Veronica was getting closer and closer to Luke's base strength. This progress was insane. He had trained with weights and resistance for months. He gained defined muscles and a great amount of strength in all the time he trained. However, in just a month, Veronica with her green aura had already closed considerable distances. If she kept up at this pace, in 2 months she would match him in strength, endurance, and speed. Then she would surpass him. Luke understood this. His base physique was better than that of a normie. But Veronica was also an outcast. On top of that, she had her green aura, which allowed her to physically enhance all her biological functions, that is, strength, speed, endurance, etc., to levels higher than average outcasts. Edgar had told him that there were psychics with green aura capable of facing a werewolf in close combat and coming out victorious. This was due to what had been previously mentioned in their superhuman regeneration ability. They could heal themselves while fighting and even renew their endurance. Because of all this, Luke didn't feel discouraged. It was stupid to try to compete against a psychic with a green aura using only his base outcast physique. However, if he added his telekinetic abilities into the equation, things would change drastically. His blows imbued with telekinetic waves in his arms or legs could be stronger than those of psychics with a green aura. The same went for his speed if he used telekinetic waves to dodge attacks. If he added his observation haki, he would surpass them even more. He defeated Nick, his green aura companion, without much difficulty, only using his yellow aura. On another note, the serial killer from Jericho appeared again, this time killing a middle-aged woman who was returning from work on a nearly deserted route at night. Like in the previous 2 murders, the woman was found with a part of her body mutilated, her left arm. As for Jonah, everyone assumed he was killed since he never appeared again. Only his body has yet to be found. Luke and Wednesday haven't left Nevermore again in search of more clues about the prophecy. Luke could tell that Wednesday wanted to go out and investigate, and at any moment she might run away if she didn't manage to get a day off. Days off are difficult rewards to obtain, as teachers don't give them all the time. During exams or special tests, you might be given a day off as a reward, but it's not the norm. On the other hand, if you want to leave Nevermore to visit Jericho, you must give a valid reason. You can't leave just because you feel like it. Nevermore is a boarding school. Luke preferred for things to stay slow. It wasn't in his interest to go investigate with Wednesday, since before that, he needed to master the memory extraction technique. He realized that Wednesday could solve the mystery at any moment. The other day, when they heard about the 3rd murder, Wednesday told him she suspected the person collecting the mutilated body parts was doing it for some kind of ritual. Most likely a resurrection ritual. Who would be revived? Easy Joseph Crackstone. In the drawing Rowan had gotten you could see a pilgrim facing the two of them, and no ordinary pilgrim could stand against them, only Crackstone, a normie who gained superhuman powers thanks to demons. What needed to be solved was who was behind Crackstone's resurrection. That person is the one controlling Hyde and the one collecting body parts for the ritual. They're also the person who stole the original Book of Shadows from the Pilgrim world. Additionally, according to Rowan, she would be responsible for Nevermore's destruction. Why? She doesn't want to revive Crackstone, doesn't even know how, and wouldn't do it if she knew. In any case, in the drawing she was facing Crackstone, and rather than being Nevermore's destroyer, she would be its protector. That puzzled her, so she had to get to the bottom of this mystery. Today, the entire 10th grade class that Luke belonged to had an important fencing lesson. They would have practiced duels as close to real combat as possible. This was what Wednesday had been waiting for. A tournament like the one they had months ago in their exclusive psychic class. It's possible that the teacher would reward the winner. One of those rewards could be a day off, exactly what she needed. The biggest problem is him, thought Wednesday, looking at Luke, who was already dressed in his fencing suit like everyone else. The only different suit was Wednesday's, which was black instead of white. He has his usual lazy expression. My fencing skills are superior, so I should be fine as long as he doesn't use his telekinesis or mental powers. Wednesday thought. Nervous, Luke asked, noticing Wednesday's gaze on him. He had already gotten used to Wednesday's blank stare. Since they returned from Pilgrim World, their relationship has improved. Now they spent much more time together and talked. Whether about murders and catastrophic prophecies or different types of literature, the conversations generally had a lot of sarcasm, sharp comments, and no filter from both of them. I've never felt nervous, Wednesday replied. It wasn't arrogance, she was just stating the truth. Are you an android? How do I configure you to smile more often? Luke asked with a mocking smile while pretending to search for some kind of button or something on Wednesday. Starting your stupid jokes this early, Wednesday said, unfazed by Luke's comments. She had gotten used to them, and incredibly, little by little, his remarks stopped irritating her. If anyone else had annoyed her this much, she would have cut their tongue out long ago. Sorry, Luke said with a slight smile, taking a step back as a precaution. Besides, why would you want me to smile more often? Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow. She was curious as to why Luke wanted to see her smile. Because you're cute when you smile, Luke thought. But he didn't say that. It would be way too embarrassing and totally out of character for his relationship with Wednesday. Plus, he knew the girl wouldn't even blink at that compliment. I've only seen you smile twice. The first time was when you told me that Normie would die, and the second was when we watched The Evil Dead, Luke said, moving closer to Wednesday and speaking in a low tone. Luke had managed to watch a movie with Wednesday. The event was so natural that he hadn't realized what a difficult achievement that was. He got Wednesday to go to his dorm to watch a movie. They watched the film with Xavier and Ajax, so nothing happened. And even if the two hadn't been there, nothing would have happened. Luke and Wednesday debated about gory horror movies and couldn't conclude, so they had to rewatch the movies to come to a new one. So, Wednesday asked, you only smile at creepy things. Imagine if you had to smile every time you heard my comments. That would be fun, Luke said. That would be torture. Another thing we have in common, Wednesday commented, the last sentence in a low tone referring to torture. Silence, class, Professor Vlad said, stepping forward and quieting the murmurs of all the students. Today will be a single elimination tournament. I've already set up the matchups. They were chosen at random. Let's get started quickly, as there are many matches to go through, Professor Vlad said. At the beginning, 3 matches were played simultaneously since these were the early rounds. There were many more students, not just psychics. There were werewolves, sirens, vampires, etc. Luke faced an unfamiliar boy and managed to beat him. His training hadn't been in vain, and his fencing technique had improved greatly. He didn't use his hockey yet, as it was the only technique he could use without anyone realizing he was using his psychic powers. Wednesday also won her first match without difficulty. Xavier, Ajax, Enid, Yoko, Divina, Bianca, and Kent also made it through the first round. Luke's fellow psychic classmates also passed the first round. The only one who lost was Eugene, who received several mocking comments from some werewolf students. Werewolves mocking someone for beating a psychic, pathetic. Wednesday said loudly enough for them to hear. She considered it pathetic because psychics weren't allowed to use their powers in these matches. That was a huge disadvantage against a werewolf. who had a superior physical condition compared to others, not only physical but also in reflexes. Even without transforming, their condition was superior in these situations, and she found it unfair. The werewolves turned their heads and glared at her with furious faces. But when they saw Luke standing next to her with his arms crossed, watching them, they quickly backed off. The werewolves weren't afraid of Wednesday, although she was odd, and her always blank expression could be unsettling. They didn't know about her strength, so they didn't fear her. However, they had seen Luke beat a senior werewolf student to exhaustion and kill a werewolf in the Poke-Up, though they hadn't witnessed the latter firsthand. Chapter 99, Fencing Tournament 2. Thanks, Wednesday, said Eugene, scratching his head with a bit of embarrassment. Don't thank me, you're pathetic too. You need to train more and not just rely on your psychic powers. Lose that belly a little, said Wednesday without a hint of mercy. I will, said Eugene as he walked away to get some water and cool off. Why do you defend him? Luke asked. He reminds me of my brother, though without the constant urge to strangle him, Wednesday replied. Luke already knew that Wednesday had joined the beekeeping club, and the only other member was Eugene. The three people closest to her at Nevermore were Luke, Enid, and Eugene. In the second round, Luke and Wednesday advanced without difficulty. The surprise for Luke was that Enid lost to one of the werewolf students who had mocked Eugene. Are you okay? Luke asked, approaching Enid as she took off her helmet and rubbed her shoulder in discomfort. Yeah, just a little sore, Enid said with a smile to show that nothing was wrong. Are you sure? Luke asked. He noticed dark circles under Enid's eyes, and her complexion seemed paler than usual. Yeah, it's nothing, Enid said, losing consciousness for a few seconds. Luckily, Luke was nearby and caught her. Enid, are you okay? Yoko asked, noticing her friend losing consciousness. I just feel a little dizzy, said Enid, leaning on Luke and touching her head. Your expression doesn't look good. Go to the infirmary, said Professor Vlad. Approaching them, I'll take her, said Divina, who had lost her match. Professor Vlad nodded and the two girls left the gym. She's been coming to the dorm late these last few days, said Wednesday, noticing Luke's worried expression. Coming in late, Luke thought. Maybe Enid was pushing herself too hard with training, and that wasn't good. The third round began. From this point on, there was one fight at a time, observed by the whole class. There were 8 participants left. Wednesday had to face one of the werewolves who had mocked Eugene. Not the one who beat Enid, the other one. Your boyfriend can't protect you here, the werewolf whispered to Wednesday as he passed her on his way to the far end of the track. Boyfriend, thought Wednesday, raising an eyebrow as she made her way to the other end of the track. The only person who could fit that category would be Luke. He was the first guy that came to her mind. What she didn't like at all was that he said she needed protection. She should teach this werewolf that she doesn't need anyone's protection. En garde, said Professor Vlad. And both participants put on their helmets and took their stances. Begin. Wednesday launched herself into the attack. This time she was much more aggressive than in her previous fights. Her opponent was shocked by her ferocity and barely managed to defend himself. Even though as a werewolf his physical strength was superior, Wednesday's technique was flawless. The werewolf couldn't do anything. Wednesday was reading his moves, and in less than 2 minutes the fight was over. Winner Wednesday Adams, announced Professor Vlad. I don't need Luke's protection to defeat someone so weak and pathetic, said Wednesday, taking off her helmet and looking at the werewolf with disdain. Without another word she turned and walked back to Luke's side. Wait, why didn't I deny his false statement? Wednesday thought, staring at the wooden floor with confusion on her face. Next up, Luke Poe versus Evan Smith, said Professor Vlad, and both students headed to the track. Luke glanced at Evan with an icy stare. This was the guy who beat Enid and left her shoulder hurting. He should teach him a lesson. Evan felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed Luke's gaze. Should he surrender? He considered it, but that would make him look like a coward. A werewolf afraid of a psychic who can't even use his telekinesis. He's angry, thought Wednesday, noticing Luke's expression as he put on his helmet. She had seen that same look the day they fought with the normies at Pilgrim World. This time, however, she could understand the reason for Luke's anger, as the person he was facing had hurt his ex-girlfriend. In Pilgrim World, she hadn't understood Luke's sudden change during the fight with the normies. At first, Luke had laughed at the normies and seemed relaxed, but when she regained consciousness, his relaxed attitude had shifted to one of true rage. Why, she didn't know. Begin, Professor Vlad exclaimed. Luke launched himself at his opponent. He dominated Evan with perfect precision. It didn't matter what attack Evan made, it was as if Luke knew exactly how he would strike. He could dodge or block effortlessly, thanks to his observation haki. The fight felt like child's play to Luke. In just 2 minutes he scored enough points for victory. Professor Vlad raised his hand to declare the end of the match, but Luke didn't stop. He advanced toward Evan and began attacking him with numerous quick and powerful thrusts, all aimed at the weak points of the body, points he knew very well thanks to Natasha. Evan staggered backward, dazed and confused. Luke's second thrust struck the hand holding his sword, leaving him defenseless. He fell to the ground as Luke continued to strike him. Luke's brutality toward Evan unfolded in a matter of seconds. The students watched the beating in shock, frozen as Evan's anguished screams echoed through the gym. "Where's your superior strength now, huh, werewolf?" shouted Luke, increasing the intensity of his blows. He must have pulled out the tip of his sword to cause more damage, but he couldn't turn back time now. "Stop, Luke," yelled Professor Vlad, running to separate him. The professor had to physically pull Luke away to make him stop. As Luke returned to a calm state, he removed his helmet and looked at Evan with satisfaction. "Your behavior is unacceptable. You are disqualified," Professor Vlad exclaimed, his voice booming through the large hall. "Go back with the others. You will observe the rest of the matches in silence," he added, and Luke nodded without saying a word. The fact that the professor hadn't punished him further was good, so Luke didn't argue about his disqualification. Luke returned to Wednesday's side, feeling the eyes of the entire class on him. They stopped watching him discreetly when the next match began. Bianca versus Yoko. "You should learn to control your anger better," Wednesday commented while watching Bianca and Yoko's fight. "In this case, there was no need." "I don't care about the tournament," Luke replied with a calm expression. "What if you face a stronger opponent? Your anger will only cloud your judgment and make you prone to mistakes," said Wednesday. "You're confusing something," Luke said. "What? It's not anger, it's ferocity," Luke responded, leaving Wednesday silent. Ferocity wasn't the same as anger. Ferocity was brutality, a quality that implied controlled aggression and a relentless focus. A fierce fighter could use every opening in their opponent's defense to strike mercilessly, but with a clear goal and control over their actions, very different from anger. Recalling Luke's fight, Wednesday concluded that his moves had always been calculated, never impulsive. To the observer it might have seemed that Luke was angry, and it wasn't entirely false. He was angry, but he didn't let that anger control him. Instead, he transformed it into ferocity, crushing his opponent in a relentless and controlled manner. Bianca won the match against Yoko, though it had been a very close battle. The final match was Nick, a green aura psychic, versus a vampire from Yoko's group. Vampires also had bodies superior to those of psychics, not to mention green aura psychics. Nick won against the vampire with ease. Even though he didn't use his green aura actively, it had already enhanced his physical abilities, and that enhancement was permanent. As a result, he could compete with a werewolf in strength and win as long as the werewolf didn't transform. He wasn't at a high enough level yet to match the strength of a transformed werewolf. The first semi-final would be Wednesday Addams versus Bianca Barclay. The second would be Nick versus Evan, but in Evan's current state, he couldn't win. He would only receive another beating and a bit more suffering. Wednesday versus Bianca, thought Luke, remembering that this fight had happened in the series. Although the circumstances were different, the result had been Bianca's victory. "Hey, psycho, I wonder if you're as crazy as Luke. Both of you are equally psychotic. You make a cute couple, don't you?" said Bianca with a mocking smile, watching Wednesday's blank expression. This again, thought Wednesday. Why did everyone keep calling her and Luke a couple? "Let me remind you that Psycho saved your life. If you ask me, I would have let that Hyde rip your head off," said Wednesday with a cold expression. She wouldn't have been so kind as to save Bianca and the others, even if she could have. "I know who's crazier," thought Bianca with a grimace. She didn't like to remember that night when she had been paralyzed with fear as the Hyde ran towards their group. "Engardo, begin," shouted Professor Vlad. The match started, and so far it was the most evenly matched and competitive of all. Bianca had flawless technique, just like Wednesday. The problem was that Wednesday was at a clear disadvantage. She was facing a siren. Siren tissue and bones are superior to those of a psychic. Essentially, all outcasts have better physical capabilities than psychics. Only a green aura psychic can enhance their physical abilities to surpass the other outcasts, that they remain the most powerful due to the incredible abilities their auras grant them. Just like in the series, both earned a point. At the decisive moment, Wednesday suggested a military challenge. No helmets, no tips. Professor Vlad left the decision to Bianca, who ultimately agreed. "That's a reckless move," Luke thought, surprised by Wednesday's behavior. The goth girl should know that her fencing skills are on par with Bianca's, but her physical abilities, inferior to those of a siren, put her at a clear disadvantage. With their technical skills being equal, the fight would be decided by two things: experience and physical capabilities, strength, speed, etc. For Luke, the latter remained the most important, since this was a school tournament, not a fight to the death. Wednesday might have more experience in life or death battles using her powers, but not in fencing matches. It was likely that Bianca had spent more time honing her fencing skills. Given that Wednesday, being a multifaceted genius, probably devoted less time to this discipline, in the end it all played out like in the series. Bianca managed to land a cut on Wednesday's forehead, winning the match and advancing to the final. "Oh, your blood is red." "I thought it'd be black and white," Bianca said with a wide grin. Wednesday didn't say anything, she merely touched her forehead and observed her blood. It had been a long time since she last saw her blood. "Winner Bianca Barclay, head to the infirmary, Adams." Professor Vlad instructed. "Please don't kill my ex-girlfriend," Luke Xavier said with a strange smile. "Why do you say that?" Luke asked, stopping his intense gaze at Bianca. "You had the same expression as when you were watching the werewolf guy who beat and hurt Enid." Xavier replied, and Ajax nodded. "Really?" Luke thought, surprised. He hadn't noticed that. It was odd. He was in love with Enid. As for Wednesday, before he could continue thinking about it, he saw Wednesday grab her bag and leave the gym, so he decided to follow her. "I told you," Ajax said, watching Luke chase after Wednesday. "What?" Xavier asked, confused. "That Luke would like a girl like Wednesday's," Ajax explained, and Xavier recalled his old conversation with Ajax about the girls Luke liked. The fencing tournament ended for Luke and Wednesday. To almost everyone's surprise, neither of them made it to the final. Chapter 100. Requesting a military challenge was not a smart move. By the first 2 points, you should have realized that Bianca's swordsmanship is similar to yours, adding to that her superior physique and the fact that you can't use your powers. "It was a reckless decision," said Luke, approaching Wednesday, walking quickly toward the infirmary with a rarely seen expression on her face. "I don't need your lecture, Luke." "I know," said Wednesday impatiently, without looking at Luke and walking even faster. "Then, why did you do it?" Luke asked, quickening his pace so he wouldn't fall behind. It was the first time he had seen Wednesday angry in any way. It seemed she didn't like losing. "I did it because of you." Wednesday thought without responding. Bianca's comment about Luke had bothered her. It annoyed her that Bianca was so ungrateful and called Luke a psychopath when he had saved her from Hyde. Aside from losing, what irritated her most was that she got upset over a negative comment someone else had made about Luke. She wasn't like that. She didn't care if the other students insulted someone else. Or so she thought. Not receiving an answer, Luke decided to keep his mouth shut and followed Wednesday to the infirmary. It was his first time visiting Nevermore's infirmary. Inside the infirmary, the first area was the reception. It looked like a typical medical office, with its desk shelves filled with many books and an examination bed for patients. Then there is another area separated by double doors, where there are many rows of beds with white sheets and privacy screens. This is where students need to rest and recover. Usually in Nevermore, there are many injured students due to practice fights, such as fencing duels, the ones Luke had in his psychic powers class, etc. "What are you guys doing here?" asked Divina, who had just come out of the second area. She was surprised to see Luke and Wednesday, who had blood on her forehead. "We need the nurse." "Is she here?" Luke asked. "No." After attending to Enid, a girl from another class came saying they needed her help immediately in a classroom. It seems someone fainted, and it was safer for her to go there, Divina explained. Is Enid okay?" Luke asked, concerned. Wednesday went to sit on the examination bed to wait for the nurse. "Yes, she's sleeping now. The nurse said it was just fatigue and exhaustion. With enough rest, she'll be fine. I'm going to class to inform the teacher." "See you," said Divina, leaving the infirmary. When Luke looked toward Wednesday, he noticed that she had pulled a white curtain, and he could no longer see her. 10 minutes later, she retracted the curtain and changed from her fencing uniform to her Nevermore uniform. A long-sleeved white shirt buttoned to the collar with a black tie. Over the shirt, a fitted black vest. On the lower half, her usual black skirt. "Do you mind if I change?" Luke asked, pointing to the bed with the curtain. He had also brought his bag with his clothes and wanted to change. Wednesday didn't say anything. She simply got up from her spot and sat in a chair against the wall. 5 minutes later, Luke had changed. He was now wearing a white shirt with a tie and black pants. The nurse still hadn't arrived. "She's very quiet," Luke thought, looking at Wednesday, who was staring at the floor with her dark eyes. "Do you want me to heal the cut?" Luke asked, and Wednesday looked up. "Do you have the knowledge?" Wednesday asked. "Yes," Luke replied. The cut wasn't deep or very big. Wednesday nodded. She trusted Luke's abilities and didn't want to keep waiting for the nurse. The first thing Luke did was wash his hands with soap and water. With clean hands, he approached the bed. "Come here," Luke said, patting the examination bed. It would be easier to heal her wound from there, as the height was better compared to the chair where Wednesday was sitting. Wednesday got up from the chair and sat on the bed. Her gaze was now almost level with Luke's. "May I touch your forehead? Your bangs are covering the wound," Luke asked, looking at Wednesday's face. He knew she didn't like physical contact, no matter how light it was. Go ahead, but be careful. Blood is hard to clean, Wednesday said, nodding slightly. To heal the wound, someone had to touch her forehead. Whether it was the nurse or Luke, she preferred the latter. Luke stood in front of Wednesday, his hands steady yet gentle as he lifted her bangs to reveal the cut on her forehead. She showed no sign of pain. Her face remained stoic. It's not too deep, but we need to clean it well. Let me, Luke murmured as he inspected the wound. He went to a nearby cabinet, took out a first aid kit, and began preparing the supplies: gloves, gauze, antiseptic. I didn't expect you to be so efficient. Is this a hidden talent? Wednesday asked with interest, watching Luke's actions. Luke smiled slightly. Having a photographic memory has its advantages, he said as he applied antiseptic to a piece of gauze and gently pressed it against the wound. Wednesday didn't react, except for a blink. Maybe we should injure ourselves more often to take advantage of your skills, Wednesday remarked. I'd rather be the one causing the wounds than receiving them, Luke said, and Wednesday nodded, sharing the same sentiment. He then took an antibiotic ointment and began applying it. Once finished, he took a band-aid from the kit and carefully placed it over the cut on Wednesday's forehead. A few minutes ago he was so ruthless against his opponent in fencing, and now here so careful and gentle. It's intriguing, that duality, Wednesday thought as she looked at Luke's face, which was very close to hers. She rarely saw this careful and delicate side of Luke, who was usually rude and had a tough demeanor. She had only seen him act this way with Enid. And now with her, all done, Luke said, making sure the band-aid was securely in place. He noticed a gaze and lowered his eyes from Wednesday's forehead. The girl's dark, deep eyes were staring directly at him. At that moment, Wednesday took the initiative. Without warning, she leaned forward slightly and kissed him. Luke was taken aback by the sudden move, but he didn't move from his spot. He closed his eyes and savored the kiss. It would be dishonest to say he didn't have feelings for Wednesday. For months now, they had spent time together, solving the mystery and discussing topics they both had in common. He had realized how many similarities they shared. The kiss was brief but intense. Luke enjoyed it as much as he could. For a long time, he had wondered what it would be like to kiss Wednesday's lips. Today, he finally knew. After a few seconds, they parted and looked at each other. Luke noticed a subtle shine in Wednesday's eyes. Her expression remained stoic, and there was no blush, but something was different from her usual look. Luke didn't know what to say. He knew anything he said could be used against him, and cheesy lines that worked with other girls wouldn't work here. So, he began tidying up the first aid kit. Wednesday stayed silent, still in the same spot. Luke had never experienced such an odd moment after kissing a girl. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Both of them were like that. Neither would make a sappy comment. Did you have any visions about me? Am I destined for a horrible death or something like that? Luke asked with a slight smile, putting the first aid kit back in the cabinet. Wednesday's visions usually occurred when she touched an object or a person. Kissing would also count as touching. No, maybe it should have lasted a, Wednesday replied. Luke, who was facing away from Wednesday as he put away the first aid kit, raised an eyebrow. This was a clear insinuation. He turned and looked at Wednesday, who was watching him from the bed. We should make sure, Luke said, standing in front of her. This time he took the initiative and kissed her. Wednesday accepted the kiss, closing her eyes. The kiss was much longer, lasting almost 2 minutes. They both opened their eyes and pulled away. Now, Luke asked. Nothing you'd notice since I'd pass out, Wednesday replied, shaking her head. Her anger from the earlier loss to Bianca had vanished, leaving her confused by these new emotions. We could try for another minute, Luke suggested, leaning in again, but this time Wednesday stopped him. That's enough, Wednesday said, standing up from the bed. She was at her limit. It had been her first kiss, and she had never experienced such intimate contact with another human in general. She enjoyed the kiss, which also troubled her, as she had always criticized human relationships. Wednesday walked toward the exit, opened the door, and paused before leaving. Without turning around, she said, "We need to talk about the new murder tomorrow. Meet me at the cafeteria." "Yeah, sure, I'll find you at breakfast," Luke replied. It was a good sign that she still wanted to see him after this and wouldn't start ignoring or pushing him away. Wednesday nodded and left the infirmary. Luke remained silent, staring at the floor as a deep feeling of guilt washed over him. Just one wall separated him from Enid, who was resting nearby. What did I do? Luke thought, scratching his head as he walked toward the area where Enid was sleeping. It wasn't hard to find the bed where she lay. Seeing her face filled him with even more guilt. But his concern for her outweighed everything else, so he sat down and waited for her to wake up.